Okay, well, it's a little bit after 1, so we'll get the meeting started. I'd like to call the meeting to order. And Stacy, could you please call the roll? Wherever Stacy is. Yes.
Thank you. Stephanie Shimaz,
Here.
Katie Landau,
Here.
Christina Kunkel,
Here.
Catherine Moore,
Here.
Julie Cravato,
Here.
and Alexis Jackson. Alexa, you're muted.
Can you hear me now? Here.
I can, thank you.
Great. Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Ocean Protection Council. Secretary Crowfoot is not able to make it, so I am filling in for him. And my name is Stephanie Shimaz. And I will also serve as acting chair for the meeting. So I am pleased to be joined in person today by Katie Landau. Am I getting an echo? We good? Okay. Who is participating on behalf of Secretary Yana Garcia, Christina Kunkel on behalf of State Controller Malia Cohen, Julie Cravato on behalf of Assemblymember Don Addis, and Catherine Moore, who is participating for a portion of, or I guess all of today's meeting on behalf of Senator Ben Allen. And we are joined remotely by Council Member Alexis Jackson. I'm sorry, who else was up there? Oh, got it. And Julie Cravato for Assemblymember Addis. Thank you. Okay, we have a busy agenda today. Today, the council will consider the adoption of the 2024 Science and Policy Update to the State of California's sea level rise guidance, make decisions to approve the inaugural round of Senate Bill 1 Sea Level Rise Adaptation Grant Program funding, and approve investments to improve engagement of commercial fishermen in offshore wind, and to perform foundational eelgrass surveys and modeling to inform potential port expansion in Humboldt Bay to support offshore wind development. The council will also receive information items on the Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Program, a proposed 30 by 30 framework for coastal waters, and the status of offshore wind development in California. We will be taking public comments after items 4 through 8C, with comments on non-agenda items on item 9. I will invite public comment after each of those items, and if you wish to make a comment and are attending in person, please line up at the podium. We will take in-person public comments first. After all in-person attendees have spoken, we will take public comment from those joining us virtually. If you are joining us through Zoom, please raise your virtual hand and we will unmute you, announce your name, and you will be able to provide comment to the council. If you have called into the meeting via telephone, press #2 to raise your hand. Depending on how you have accessed the meeting, you may also need to unmute yourself. Public comment is limited 2 minutes each unless otherwise approved to be extended, and there will be a timer on the screen to track your allotted time. Anyone interested in providing comment will need to raise their hand by the end of the agenda presentation. Hands raised after that time will not be placed in the queue for public comment. All right, I think that takes care of the housekeeping items. And I welcome any comments or updates from the council.
Good afternoon, Katie Landau, Special Advisor, Deputy Secretary for Water Policy at Eckerle, PA, and here for Secretary Yana Garcia. I just have one quick update. I'm going to step on Jenn's toes for the Executive Director's report with this. But in April, the State Water Resources Control Board approved revisions on the interim mitigation payment calculation for the once through cooling policy. And as many of you are probably aware, this mitigation calculation determines just how much existing power plants pay to the OPC and to the State Coastal Conservancy, with the collected funds supporting mitigation projects to reduce the impacts of the cooling water intake structures and the marine and estuarine life. So these revisions really just focused on increasing costs for entrainment and impingement, and also updated the annual escalator for inflation. And they were made to ensure that appropriate compensation for the interim impacts of the continued plant operations. So over the next 7 years, these changes to the calculation are estimated to increase the payments from approximately 61 million to 133 million. So really looking forward in the future of seeing what projects will be coming in front of in front of OPC for that funding. And that's it.
Wonderful. Any other comments or updates? Okay, hearing none, then we'll move on to the executive director's updates.
Thank you so much. And thank you, Chair Shimaz, for being here with us today. I'm going to start with an update on the budget. As I shared in our February meeting, the governor's proposed budget in January outlined several reductions to OPC's funding to help balance the state budget. I want to provide an update on the May revision and some recent actions by the legislature. First, as it relates to our general funding for overall ocean and coastal resilience work. In 2022, Ocean Protection Council received an appropriation of $100 million over 2 years to fund resilience projects that conserve and restore ocean, wildlife, and ecosystems. The January budget proposed to reduce this funding by $35 million, but retained $65 million. We have already invested over half of that funding. The May revision proposes to maintain the remaining $27.5 million, but shifts the funding source from general fund to the greenhouse gas reduction fund. For our Senate Bill 1 funding, in 2022, the Ocean Protection Council also received a multi-year appropriation totaling $102 million. And this funding is to support local, regional, and tribal governments in developing sea level rise adaptation plans and projects helping implement SB 1. The January budget proposed to reduce this funding by $25 million and shifted the remaining $36.8 million from general fund to the greenhouse gas reduction fund. The May revision didn't propose further reductions, but did include a 2-year delay for that $36.8 million appropriation out to July 2026. Recent actions by the legislature propose to restore all funding for this program with a shift to the greenhouse gas reduction fund, with a $20 million appropriation in July of this year, followed by a $41.8 million appropriation in 2026. I will remind everyone that OPC has an existing $37.5 million appropriation for this program. We're bringing the first round of projects for your approval today under item 5. The May revise also included a proposed $16 million funding package for the Ocean Protection Council, the Coastal Commission, and the State Lands Commission for activities related to offshore wind development. This includes $3.6 million to OPC to begin implementation of a comprehensive environmental monitoring and research program to understand and address the potential ecosystem impacts from offshore wind development and inform adaptive management strategies. This $16 million funding package will also support permitting, planning, and engagement with California Native American tribes and underserved communities. We anticipate that the budget will be in print on June 12th, and we will be tracking final decisions closely. Shifting gears to some really happy news. Last week, in partnership with Better World Group, OPC hosted the first meeting of our inaugural Environmental Justice Advisory Board. And if I can get the next slide, perfect. This board is made up of 7 incredible community leaders and advocates who represent California's diverse regions and communities. The Environmental Justice Advisory Board serves to provide advice to advance equity across our coastal and ocean policies and actions. And our members include Frank Buckham IV from San Diego, Patricia Flores Irazaval from Los Angeles, Sonia Hammonds from the San Francisco Bay Area, Hannah Lent from the Central Coast, Carlos Moran from Los Angeles, Luis Neuner from the North Coast, and Mario Ordonez from San Diego. I had the pleasure and honor of spending the day with our board members last week. Their personal and professional experiences and their motivation for joining the board was so incredibly inspiring to me. I want to thank each of them for their time and for their openness to doing this work with us. And I can't wait to introduce them to this council at an upcoming meeting sometime before the end of this year. A huge thanks to Maria Rodriguez for her leadership in this effort. We could not have done this without you, Maria, so thank you. Turning now to sea level rise. So items 4 and 5 today are huge milestones for Ocean Protection Council's sea level rise work. You will hear more about these items shortly, but I want to take a moment now to thank our partners at Ocean Science Trust, Dr. Liz Whiteman, Monica LaFleur, and Dom Koning, our sea level rise task force members, including our co-chairs, Dr. Ben Hamilton, Dr. Patrick Barnard, and Laura Engeman, and OPC's Dr. Justine Kimball, for their time, their expertise, their patience in updating the state's sea level rise guidance. I also want to share with the public that in late March, we officially launched OPC's Senate Bill 1 Technical Assistance Program in partnership with Coastal Quest. The Technical Assistance Program will provide direct application support for environmental justice communities, federally recognized tribes, and small and rural communities, and applicants that are facing locally specific barriers to sea level rise in order to maximize equitable access to this funding. And you'll hear more about this from Ben Dorfman during item 5. Councilmember Orlando did steal my thunder about the once through cooling mitigation fees. Thank you for that. Just to put a finer point, to remind the council that as directed by the council and the water board's once through cooling policy, OPC's current investment priorities for these payments have focused on increasing marine life associated with the state's marine protected area network and habitat restoration. So right now, leadership from OPC and the Water Board and the Conservancy are working really closely to assess the program success to date, to improve transparency going forward, and to identify pathways to better invest in tribal and community priorities with this funding as we move forward. So we are initiating a public process to update our interagency MOU that will guide program implementation. And we plan to come back to the council for approval of our ongoing investment priorities, either at your September or your December meetings. A quick update on plastics. In late April, OPC Deputy Director Caitlin Kalua and Water Quality Program Manager Christina Sur attended the 4th session of the UN Intergovernmental Program on Plastic Pollution in Canada with colleagues from CalRecycle. OPC met with subnational governments to share approaches in addressing plastic pollution as part of a panel on the role of local and state governments, discuss the importance of source reduction to prevent plastic pollution through the California's statewide microplastic strategy, which this council approved in 2022. The 5th and final negotiating session to establish an internationally legally binding treaty to address plastic pollution is scheduled for late November in Busan, South Korea. OPC staff is working to identify high-level state participation at this meeting. And finally, just a few quick personnel updates. First, I'm happy to share that Katie Siri has been hired as an environmental scientist to lead our sustainable fisheries and aquaculture work. Katie was one of our 2023 Sea Grant Fellows working on MPAs and fisheries within our biodiversity program, and we are delighted to have her back permanently. Our 2024 summer interns are about to join us. After receiving close to 230 applications, we have selected 4 students to participate in our 2024 summer internship program. Lawrence Chen from UC Davis, Leah Hawkins from Cal Poly San Luis Obispo, Mina Adabag, from UC Berkeley, and Ariana Lawrence from Pomona College, and they will all join us in June. Anushka Vijay will be the 5th intern in this cohort, coming to us through a merit-based undergraduate award at Stanford. We are really excited to have these students join us this summer, and we plan to have them present at your September council meeting. Next, I want to share my thanks to Yiwei Wang for her contributions to our work on offshore wind. During Iwei's time at OPC, she provided important expertise that informed the scoping and launch of our offshore wind environmental monitoring guidance and interagency efforts to identify key offshore wind research and monitoring priorities. Iwei was on a 2-year limited term position, and her last day with OPC was on May 31st. We are wishing her the best in her next chapter, and she will always be a part of the OPC family. Finally, I want to give a quick shout out to Stacy Hayden, OPC's communications manager. And in the back there, she worked tirelessly to ensure that all of our meeting materials were posted online and accessible, communicated with our council and the public, and is working her magic behind the scenes here today to make sure that the meeting runs smoothly. Stacy, we appreciate you so much. Thank you for everything that you do. And that concludes my report. I am happy to answer any questions.
Great. Are there any questions for Jenn? No? Okay, well, hearing none, then we'll move on to item 3. Liz, the update from the science advisor.
Great. Thank you, Chair, Council members. I am so proud to be here today on behalf of the Ocean Science Trust and Ocean Protection Council science teams, as well as the broader science community, as you consider the potential adoption of the sea level rise guidance and the draft 30 by 30 decision framework. It is so gratifying to see how a science foundation to that work has uncovered policy pathways and is accelerating action. Said in my best British accent, we can't say this everywhere, but in California, thank you for your partnership in leaning on science to accelerate progress. So on sea level rise, I will just echo Jenn's thanks to the OPC Ocean Science Trust and members of the task force for their incredible leadership and collaboration in updating the scientific understanding of sea level rise and providing that strong basis for policy direction. Over the past 5+ years, new studies have advanced our understanding of the global processes driving sea level rise, and that the guidance update brings that best available science to the table. But as you'll hear more about in a moment, it's not just that we know a bit more about when and how much sea levels will rise, but also that the approach to communicating that understanding in a set of sea level scenarios has significantly advanced our ability to plan and build resilience. We also now have tools available to all local planners and for projects that incorporate sea level rise to understand the risks and hazards posed by things like coastal flooding and groundwater rise. Turning to 30 by 30, just really quickly, as I know you'll hear more about in a moment, we've been thrilled to partner with OPC on the development of a scientifically rigorous decision framework for advancing 30 by 30 in coastal waters. I extend appreciation for the input from a technical advisory panel who brought frameworks and approaches that have been tested and vetted by the international science community, and then thoughtfully asked, what do these mean for California? How do we apply them in California? How do we make them relevant to California? We're very much looking forward to engaging with communities in California to continue to build out this framework, making sure that we draw on the best available science and making sure that we make it applicable to decisions here. Lastly, just turning to a different aspect of our partnership, I wanted to extend thanks for Ocean Protection Council and particularly Mike Esgro's collaboration on a recent briefing that we held for the legislature on kelp restoration. Sponsored by Assemblymember Diane Papan, the briefing brought together leaders on this topic from California Department of Fish and Wildlife, Sea Grant, and Ocean Protection Council, together with scientific researchers and the broader science community, to hear current updates, actions, and investments aimed at accelerating restoration and recovery of California's kelp forest ecosystems. About 80 attendees joined us live, including legislative leaders from both state and federal offices, as well as policy committee staffers handling this issue. The webinar is now available on our website and can serve as a standing resource for California as an update for this year on our kelp forest ecosystems, with the recording only in its first weeks approaching a couple of hundred views. I expect that to continue to grow. And I mention this both with thanks, but also to close by extending an offer to the council members that we would welcome hearing your perspective and interests on topics where convening a similar briefing or other kind of science dialogue to elevate shared understanding among a policy audience could be productive and useful. And I'm happy to follow up on that. With that, thank you.
Members, any questions? No? All right, with that, I'll invite Justine up and our guest presenters, Dr. Benjamin Hamilton and Dr. Patrick Bernard, to present on item number 4. Item number 4 is an action item, consideration of adoption of the State of California Sea Level Rise Guidance 2024 Science and Policy Update.
Great. And thank you to Jen and Liz for teeing this up. I am also excited to be here today to present this item. I'm going to be providing a brief introduction to the document and the process, and then pass it over to Ben and Patrick to present on the science. And then I will end with the policy recommendations. Next slide. So the 2024 guidance presented here today is an update to the 2017 science and 2018 policy guidance documents. The science was presented in Rising Seas in 2017, and the policy recommendations followed that in 2018. The guidance included probabilistic sea level rise projections for 12 tide gauges and a stepwise process for how to select based on risk tolerance. Recommendations for planning and adaptation were also included. Next slide. For this update, we combined the science and policy into one report. As Jen mentioned, we also partnered with the California Ocean Science Trust to convene a science task force who authored chapters 2 and 3, and which you'll hear more about from Ben and Patrick next. We also coordinated very closely with our partner state agencies in the development process. Next slide. So the task force kicked off in August 2022, and the guidance was first released to the public on January 19th, 2024 for a 45-day public comment period. During this time, OPC and OST organized a public webinar, which was recorded and posted to our website, and organized 4 regional remote workshops. Ben and I also went on a bit of a road show and provided additional public presentations to BCDC, the Coastal Commission, and the State Lands Commission. We also provided opportunity for tribal engagement and input, including listening sessions and formal government-to-government consultations. So with that, I will pass it over to Ben.
Thanks, Justine. And before I get into a brief overview of section 2 of the report, I do want to acknowledge and say thanks as well to OST and OPC for the leadership. Jen and Liz, in particular, or Justine, Liz, and Jen in particular have done a great job navigating this process. I'm not sure this is the word they would use, but I have thought it's been a fun process. In comparison to other states, which I won't name, the process here has been very refreshing and thorough. I think Justine just outlined a very rigorous process to get us to this stage of the report, and looking forward to seeing it through. All right, so I want to give a brief overview of chapter 2, and Liz gave a very nice introduction of kind of where we started with this science update and what we're basing our update on. So if you can go forward one slide. All right, so in terms of what we've included 5 sea level scenarios. Again, this is a little bit different than what was in the 2017-2018 report, but it's a similar approach, just a step beyond based on our latest understanding of sea level guidance and how we interpret the science. And we're providing these 5 scenarios, which I'll talk about more in the next slide, across the coastlines of California, but also specifically at 14 tide gauges here in California. So very local information, taking these national, international reports from the IPCC 6th assessment, and then also from this technical report in 2022, which focuses on the national level, bringing that down to a California specific level. So we are basing this on established scientific documents. We're not doing new science here. We're really bringing the latest and greatest down to the local level, making it relevant to us here in California. Beyond that, we did a number of things which I think are very progressive and really based on things that we've learned about science even since that 2022 report, evaluating the most likely scenario. So using other observations, other information, other contexts we have to provide that much more understanding and certainty about what we know on the science side and maybe some things that we don't know quite as well. We did increase the use of observations. So a lot of what was done in 2017 was model-based. Here, given the observations, the tide gauges, the satellites that we have, we can couple those with the models to really provide much better information than we've ever been able to before. And I'll talk more about this in the next slide, but we're really trying to provide storylines. So when we talk about these scenarios, they're really possible futures, right? When you talk about the high scenario, it says something about where we might be headed. Same thing with the lower scenarios. I do want to reiterate that point there in the bottom right. There have been meaningful changes since the 2017 Rising Seas report. Unsurprisingly, in the past 7 or 8 years, science has advanced, and we're really trying to capture that in this report. Then go to the next slide. All right, so we have these 5 sea level scenario storylines. This is really bringing California in line with what we're doing at the federal level, at the national level, trying to have that consistency there. So when one gets updated, there's this consistent framework for updating the other. And we have these 5 scenarios which are defined by target amounts of sea level rise in the year 2100. So even though we have targets in 2100, we do have trajectories as we get out to 2100. So we still have estimates for, say, 2050. We have estimates beyond 2100. We have this complete set spanning from 2020 all the way out into 2150. And what we can do is we can take these different scenarios and we can say something about what the future might look like, as I said. So we have the low scenario. That's a very aggressive emissions policy. We're able to limit things. We're able to really keep sea level down. We move up to the high scenario. That's where we start to bring in some of the ideas like the doomsday glaciers and those very high-end processes that we know might come into play, but there's still a lot of uncertainty in terms of how those will play out in the future. And then I think the more important element here is kind of what spans or what sits in between those 2 different scenarios. So we talk about the intermediate scenario a lot in the report, and based on additional context we're able to bring in from observations and also current trajectories of warming, we can say that's something like the most likely scenario, and then that can then be used and interpreted in the guidance that's in the report as well. So if we go to the next slide, so one of the things we did within the report is we broke this down into time periods because there's, again, different things we can say about different time periods as we go out into the future. So we focus on the near term. So this is kind of a new thing that we've been doing. And it's really because we have a much narrower range of possible sea level rise in the near term. So this intermediate scenario that I just talked about is about 0.8 feet of sea level rise, and that range from low to high is just a few inches either side of that 0.8. So it's a very narrow range, and we can kind of lock in on that intermediate scenario if you're just looking out the next 3 decades as the most likely. And this figure here I'm showing the right is just those 5 sea level scenarios going out to 2150. That range in the middle is what you get from the observations from the tide gauges, and you can see it overlaps very nicely with the intermediate scenario, again, providing additional information for us on the science side that can then be used in the guidance generation process. So we go to the next slide. If we move out further into the future, however, that's where things really start to expand. So if we look out past 2050, up to 2100, then out to 2150 further out, that's where you really start to see this expansion of the range of possibilities as you go out into the future. So we can kind of break up these 5 scenarios into 2 different groups. So the low to intermediate scenarios really span the range of possibilities without the ice sheets going crazy and contributing a lot to sea level rise. The intermediate to high scenarios start to incorporate those possibilities where there's still a great amount of uncertainty and we're not sure exactly what will happen, but we want to make sure that's accounted for in our scenarios. So we can kind of group these 2 and these 2 sets of scenarios and then start to interpret that and understand exactly how sea level might change as we go out to 2100. Now, if we look beyond 2150, just to be clear, as scientists, we're very uncertain about what might happen. The phrase deep uncertainty or ambiguity, those terms are all used in terms of what might happen. But that's where you start to see the potential upper end, these very high amounts of sea level rise, potentially out to 12 feet by 2150 start to come into play. One thing to note, and an important thing in this report, and something we've talked a lot about, that the H++ scenario from the 2017-2018 report is really above the best estimates we have of the upper end of sea level rise. So that upper end has been updated based on the latest and greatest science, and that high end number has come down as a result. It's a similar line of evidence. We haven't gotten rid of H++ per se. It's really those same models that were used to support H++ in the past. They've advanced, and now we're incorporating that latest information, those latest model results into our guidance. So you can see here, this figure on the right, that dashed line is the H++ scenario from the previous report. And you can see that at pretty much all times, it's higher than what we see from our 5 scenarios. One last point here, if you separate out subsidence, vertical land motion, you get a pretty consistent set of scenarios across the coastlines of California. We do take advantage of that in the report. Certainly, there are local factors that cause sea level to be different from one location to the next, but we can provide kind of a consistent set of information based on what we know, the ice sheets, the ocean, what those factors are going to do, and then bring in the vertical land motion separately. And again, this report, I think, and what we're doing here is really at the leading edge of what we're able to do with vertical land motion, taking lessons learned from the 2022 report and from the IPCC assessment and bringing those into this update. All right, I will leave it there and then pass it over to Patrick.
Thank you so much, and yeah, you can advance to the next slide. And again, yeah, kudos to OST and OPC for letting the science drive the policy. And Ben and I worked in other parts of the country, as they noted, and we're not always getting the same response. It can be a challenge, but there are other states which are eagerly awaiting the release of this guidance, and they're going to follow California's example. So thanks again. So my role here in section 3, along with the other co-leads on this, Dr. Gary Griggs and Dr. Christina Hill, and among others, was to translate this new sea level rise guidance and projections into coastal impacts. And go to the next slide, please. And so here we're trying to answer that so what question. We have these new projections. What do they actually mean? What does it mean in terms of exposure of California's people, assets, and ecosystems? And also went to highlight the importance of storms right on top of sea level rise. The sea is not static, it is dynamic, it varies on all sorts of time scales. And so it's not just bathtub sea level rise, there's also storms right on top of that. Next slide, please. And so there are several key takeaways from this section. The first is that these hazards that we're already experiencing today, coastal flooding, coastal erosion, groundwater rise, are going to be exacerbated and get worse, and also move into areas that we have not seen before be impacted. And so on the upper left, this is sort of high tide, king tide flooding that we see many parts of the state. Upper middle, we had some significant storms the last couple of winters, and those were certainly gotten us past a tipping point with a little bit of sea level rise. Those storms are worse than they would have been 50 years ago. Cliff retreat, beach loss, storm-driven flooding, and groundwater rise. These are all factors that we're already experiencing. We've already built up our communities very, very close to this very dynamic margin. And so as sea level rises, it's going to be even more challenging. Next slide, please. And so another key takeaway is that sea level rise is going to increase the frequency of coastal flooding, and it's going to do so in a nonlinear way. And so this is a really nice tool that Phil Thompson put together with Ben and his team at NASA, which basically you can pick whichever tide gauge that you want. You use this sea level rise guidance, you pick a threshold elevation of flooding. In this case, they've chosen minor flooding, and look at the number of flooding days per year. And so you see it's fairly flat over the next decade or so, and then the 2030s, it really starts to take off. And so in this particular example from Alameda, where you might have 1 or 2 flooding days per year now, by 2040, it might be 10, by 2050, maybe 20. And by the end of the century, we're talking about an exponential increase, perhaps 300 or more days. And this is a common feature of many areas of the California coast. Again, we're built in this very narrow margin, so sea level rises, that margin is going to be impacted more and more. One rule of thumb is that flood frequency essentially doubles with every 2 to 4 inches of sea level rise. And so if we're expecting roughly 12 inches by end of century, you can see how that is going to increase exponentially. Next slide, please. And the other key takeaway here is that sea level rise driven hazards are going to impact our people, our infrastructure, our ecosystems. And this is looking at the exposure of the California population to sea level rise and storms. In this histogram, going from left to right are these different sea level rise scenarios, from the low all the way up to the high. And then the different colors are different storm levels from your daily conditions to your 100-year storm conditions. And so a lot of these tools we were able to leverage, which were funded by state and federal research dollars. And so we're able to basically line up these scenarios with these products and these, and then basically translate these projections into hazards. And so this is looking at that California coastal population exposure. And what you can see here is that sea level rise matters hugely. If we go from the low to the high sea level rise, exposure increases by a factor of about 12. And then storms also matter. Looking at around 2050, which is about 20, we might probably get about 25 centimeters of sea level rise or so, roughly 10 inches. Storms increase flooding by about a factor of 4. And so we have to incorporate sea level rise, we have to incorporate storms. And what this also tells us is that emissions matter. Suppressing emissions is gonna take us on these lower trajectories, much less exposure. Whereas the sort of the worst case scenario of the projections that we have now gets us in the range of about 500,000 people in California exposed to flooding by the end of the century, assuming no policy changes and assuming no coastal management actions are taken. Next slide, please. And this illustrates how storm events are going to become more damaging in the future. And so this is looking at, I think you go back, we may have lost the animation on this, but essentially if you look at just the, you can go back one, it's fine. If you look at basically the annual storm today, has very little impact in a community like Sunset Beach, which does experience high tide flooding, non-trivial. But once you go to the intermediate, a low and intermediate high scenario shown here, you can see how much just the sort of your average winter storm, average annual winter storm is going to impact communities like this across the state. One of the reasons, again, is we've built essentially on this very thin margin. We've basically reclaimed estuaries. We've built into estuaries. We've already put ourselves in harm's way, and now we have to deal with sea level rise on top of that. Next slide, please. And this is really a sort of a synopsis of what we're challenged with in California over the next century. We've pinned our development in, we've pinned our ecosystems into these very narrow, vulnerable areas. This is the Carpinteria Salt Marsh here. And so we have residential development on the outer coast. And we expect as much as 3/4 of beaches to be lost over the next century because that is fixed in place. The beaches is eroding due to sea level rise. We're effectively losing our beaches. Similarly here with these tidal marshes can migrate upland with sea level rise through time. But because we've built up roads around them, residential development, railroads, et cetera, there's really no place for these marshes to go. So we're going to end up losing a lot of them in the future. So habitat space is going to become increasingly limited because of the built infrastructure that's pinning it in place and effectively will be drowned. And then also cliffs are a really important feature along our California coast, lots of cliff top communities. And we expect with about 1 meter sea level rise of the intermediate scenario, about 75 feet of cliff retreat. And so a lot of cliff top developments are going to be threatened again, assuming we do nothing. Next slide, please. And the last major point here, which has really been reflective of an increase in interest and research in this area, is looking at the coastal groundwater table and how it will respond to sea level rise. And so the top panel there shows the saturated ground close to the coast. The water table is very shallow because it's controlled by sea level rise and by sea level. And so as sea level rises in the bottom panel, that water table is going to rise as well. That saltwater ridge is going to move inland. And whether we have a wall or a berm or infrastructure, whatever's in place there, that water table does not care. It's going to keep rising. In some cases, you're going to have water basically peaking out and ponding behind coastal communities or within coastal communities. And so we have to come forward with a holistic approach that not only considers overland flooding, but also the flooding that's going to come up from underneath. There's two really nice resources that are available. One, which was developed at SFEI with Dr. Christina Hill, and also in partnership with Climate Pathways, which shows the response of the water table to sea level rise under the most extreme storm conditions, the highest water table conditions. And the bottom panel, there's a statewide resource which looks at the response of the water table to sea level rise on an average daily basis. And so these are available at these two locations. And then last slide, please. And so what does this really mean? And where does groundwater really sit in this range of coastal hazards? We know that water in the shallow subsurface can be a problem for drainage systems, for shallow infrastructure like pipes and gas, utilities, et cetera, for building foundations, it can liberate pollutants. And so we looked at this particular hazard across the state. Shallow groundwater over the next century, roughly about 1 meter sea level rise. So the intermediate scenario could impact about 2 million California residents and about $500 billion in property. And this is about 6 to 9 times higher than overland flooding. So this is not to say the impacts will be as great, but the exposure is certainly greater. And research is now really underway and developing to understand what the actual impacts of having a shallower groundwater table will be across the state. So again, something we have to consider as we move forward. And then last slide, these are just some links for additional resources for the flood analysis tool from NASA and some of the flood projections, and then some additional statewide resources as well. So thank you so much for your time.
Next slide. Thank you, Ben and Patrick. And so building on this updated science, Chapter 4 focuses on the recommendations for how to include sea level rise in planning and projects. Similar to the 2018 guidance, it includes a stepwise process seen here. I will not walk through that process, but the high takeaways of those steps include the recommendation that the most precautionary approach is to evaluate the intermediate high, and high scenarios, as well as 100-year storm conditions. This is part of the analysis step to assess a spectrum of potential impacts, consequences, and responses. The final step of the process comes after the analysis and involves selecting a sea level rise value for a project or adaptation pathway. The guidance recognizes that this selection process will include consideration of many factors, but like the 2018 guidance, highlights risk assessment as an important consideration and recommends the intermediate scenario for low risk averse applications, the intermediate high for medium high risk, and the high scenario for extreme risk aversion. However, there's a lot of flexibility built into the language in recognition that there will be local and project-specific consideration. The guidance also recommends the adaptation pathways approach, which allows for planning or building to lower amounts of sea level rise in the near term, while at the same time planning for longer term options that are adaptive to those higher sea level rise amounts. Next slide. I want to now focus on the public comments that we received and how the draft guidance was revised or not in response. We received 42 public comments, but we also considered feedback we received during the regional workshop and other channels. For the science chapters, the majority of feedback was around providing additional information and clarity to improve the understanding and flow. For instance, we reordered the chapters so that the science chapters were grouped together, and the task force provided additional information on the geographic scope, the H++ scenario from rising seas, and storm conditions. This was all addressed to the maximum extent possible. For the policy chapter, some comments were focused on additional information or clarity, for instance, around the tide gauge selection process, adaptation pathways, and assessing groundwater during the analysis step. We addressed these to the maximum extent possible as well. Others were more focused on content-related comments. For instance, adding flooding projection tables to both the science section as well as integrate that into the stepwise process. We did revise and add language related to the flooding projections, as you heard from Patrick, but ultimately we were not able to find a straightforward way to include the tide gauge projection tables into the documents, but we provided that information on the tool and how that can be interpreted. We also received comments related to the scenario recommendations that I just covered in the stepwise process, specifically that instead of the recommendation to evaluate and apply the intermediate to high scenarios, that should be shifted to the intermediate low for the low risk application and the intermediate high for extreme risk. We provided more information on the exceedance probabilities for those scenarios, in particular that the intermediate low scenario has an 82% probability of being exceeded by 2100 to support the recommendation of retaining the intermediate scenario for low risk applications. For the high scenario, it was determined that despite the low likelihood of occurring, it's still appropriate to recommend for applications such as critical infrastructure. However, we did add language that recognized that there will be limited situations in which building to the high scenario right now might be feasible, but instead the adaptation pathways approach should be pursued. The edits related to the high scenario, as well as other selections, also addressed the comments around flexibility related to local conditions. And we also clarified and revised the development type section to provide more relevant examples. So I'm sure some of these themes will get picked up in the public comment that we'll hear today, and I'm happy to elaborate more on them. Next slide. But with that, the recommendation before the council today is to adopt the 2024 guidance. Thank you.
We'll see. All right, at this time, I'd like to invite invite members of the public to comment on this.
Good afternoon. I'm Laura Walsh, California Policy Manager for the Surfrider Foundation. Surfrider is deeply involved in local campaigns to protect communities for sea level rise, and we're celebrating this guidance today as an advancement of science applied to us here in our own backyard. I do want to call out 3 really shocking projections from that last presentation and from the guidance. That's by 2100, 75% of our state's beaches could be gone. That the kind of storm that wrecked Capitola's Pier last year could happen daily, and that thousands of contaminated sites could be exposed near our poorest communities in San Francisco. Put simply, this guidance is a really big deal, and California is not prepared. 2/3 of our communities have yet to complete their local coastal program updates. Toxic waste sites are largely dealt with by capping, and Santa Cruz is still rebuilding from its last storms. Many beaches, one of our state's greatest public trust resources, are already gone. For those reasons, I want to be here to defend the use of the high scenario in this document, which is very important for preventing disaster to infrastructure and, of course, for protecting the public trust. I also want to make clear that enhancing the near-term projecting about a foot statewide average of sea level rise by 2050 is not a cause to delay or weaken our efforts for sea level rise planning. We have very difficult choices to make and can still expect 6.6 feet of rise by 2100. We hope this is made clear in follow-up guidance from the Coastal Commission and other sister agencies involved in the Sea Level Rise Task Force that significant leadership is needed to address coastal squeeze and the related impact on the public trust. And we encourage this document to use case studies of Bayview and Piedras Blancas as examples where we've addressed coastal squeeze and also need to address serious environmental justice, toxic contamination from groundwater issues. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Laura Dehan. I'm the State Director for Environment California and Environment California Research and Policy Center. And mostly I want to align my comments with what Laura Walsh just said with Surfrider Foundation. So underscore agree with what she said. The presentation and the work that we just saw is really tremendous and also really scary. I think most Californians still think about those extreme events like the storms in Santa Cruz that destroyed the Capitola Pier or that have washed away part of Highway 1 as unusual and extreme events. And the fact that in just a short time, really, in less than a century, that we could be seeing those types of storms on a regular daily basis is really scary. And really commend your work for looking at the science and starting the planning now to make sure that we are doing everything we can to protect our beaches and our future. So thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Madeline Cavalieri, and I'm the Coastal Commission's Deputy Executive Director. Coastal Commission staff support the updated state sea level rise guidance and recommend that you adopt it today. We've been working closely with your staff during the development of the guidance and appreciate the productive collaboration. The guidance fulfills its fundamental purpose of providing the latest, best available science and sea level rise scenarios, while also providing detail on the use of adaptation pathways, monitoring, and triggers. It provides an appropriate emphasis on a precautionary approach, which California has long held, and provides the foundation that the Coastal Commission and other state agencies need to work with local communities to implement adaptation solutions on the ground level. The guidance directs us to look at a range of potential projections, including high scenarios that are currently thought to have a low probability of occurring over the next 100 years. But authorities like the IPCC and NOAA state that the high scenario is possible and it's appropriate for long-term planning. The Coastal Commission has been working with local governments and asset managers to address high scenarios, especially for critical infrastructure. And we have already seen examples of projects that have been built to be safe from the most extreme sea level rise amounts while also serving current community needs. For example, most of the realigned section of Highway 1 at Gleason's Beach in Sonoma County is set back to be safe under the high scenario. We've also seen examples that used adaptation pathways. For example, the Commission on several occasions allowed upgrades to wastewater treatment facilities that account for lesser amounts of sea level rise with requirements to complete additional adaptation planning in the future. The guidance before you today explains how resiliency to high scenarios can be accomplished either using through current project design like at Gleason's Beach or through the use of adaptation pathways. So Coastal Commission staff intend to update the Commission's sea level rise policy guidance to align with this update. The Commission's document will reflect the content of the state guidance and will provide additional detail and recommendations specific to the Coastal Act. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Melissa Sparks-Crans, the Environmental Quality Advocate with the League of California Cities. Just as a brief introduction, the League of California Cities, we represent 61 coastal cities along the coast, and our council members in partnership with county representatives coordinate regularly with the Coastal Commission through its local government working group. The local government working group focuses on the common goal between local governments and the Commission in adapting to sea level rise and updating local coastal programs. So we explore strategies which maintain statewide consistency in protecting coastal resources and access while providing local flexibility to best serve our communities based on local conditions and priorities. These regular discussions are crucial conversations about how to address sea level rise in California and making the coast resilient to all. We would like to request that both cities and county representatives have ongoing opportunities to join the 17 state agencies in the Sea Level Rise Collaborative moving forward to continue discussions about how the sea level rise guidance here today will be used in planning and adaptation efforts moving forward. We also wanted to express our sincere appreciation to both the Coastal Commission and Ocean Protection Council leadership and staff for meeting with our Coastal City Council members to discuss the draft sea level rise guidance. We believe this guidance will be very helpful for local governments in understanding, disclosing possible impacts, and assessing sea level rise scenarios. This will allow our local governments the ability to incorporate a variety of data, information, and local conditions that our communities are facing, and to allow local regional planning, design, and implementation efforts to progress, including the consideration of the adaptation pathways. We know that the state is committed to continuing to refine the guidance in future years with greater scientific information given the precautionary approach, and this will continue to be informative for local jurisdictions who will continue to adapt to sea level rise through community-based planning, decision-making, and management now and in the future. Thank you for your time today.
That was perfect timing. So yes, do we have anyone online wishing to comment?
Thank you. Yes, we do have 8 online. We have a caller ending in 5936, then Rachel Darling, Spencer Sachs, Lily Sukiyama, Samuel Casilla, Emily Parker, Mark Gold, Austin Gent, and Ricardo Duke, and more people are being added quickly. Caller ending in 5936, you have the floor.
Oh, that's a lot of folks. So just a reminder that we have a 2-minute limit here. Thank you, everyone.
Eileen Boken, Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods, speaking on my own behalf. I would encourage OPC to also consider onshore and nearshore changes and their effects on coastline erosion. In San Francisco, in terms of onshore hydrology changes, Lake Merced used to be a lagoon which flowed into the ocean under what is now Sloat Boulevard. The ocean currents off Sloat Boulevard are now the strongest off Ocean Beach. The shoreline of San Francisco's Ocean Beach was changed when the Upper Great Highway was built. In the 20th century, bay dredgings were deposited directly off Ocean Beach, which changed the seabed contours. This is one reason why San Francisco is an exclusion area in the Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary. Then bay dredgings were deposited in the deep ocean disposal site and are now once again being deposited directly off Ocean Beach. Sand mining in San Francisco Bay is contributing to erosion and accretion on Ocean Beach. Dr. Patrick Barnard was the lead for the USGS study on this topic. This study confirms why the San Francisco Department of Public Works has a sand relocation program, which moves sand from the accretion area in North Ocean Beach to erosion area in South Ocean Beach. The nearshore effects of hydrology of 10 to 11 millions of gallons per day of discharge of treated wastewater from San Francisco's Oceanside Treatment Facility into the nearby ocean, and the possibility of saltwater intrusion into the West Side Basin aquifer. Thank you.
Rachel Darling, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Rachel Darling, and I'm a science research and policy specialist at USC Sea Grant. So I'm here today to speak on behalf of USC Sea Grant to voice our support for the adoption of the 2024 California Sea Level Rise Guidance. So one of our core missions at USC Sea Grant is to foster understanding of coastal science and provide innovative science for better decision making and adaptation planning. So we believe that many features of the 2024 Sea Level Rise Guidance document will be helpful to inform planning for our coastal partners, including but not limited to the elements of providing updated sea level rise projections every 5 years, providing specific expected sea level rise projections for the 13 NOAA tide gauges on the coast of California, providing a decision framework for adaptation planning and conducting vulnerability assessments, and also highlighting the ways that rising sea level coupled with groundwater rise, storms, and high tides will magnify coastal hazards and emerging risks to the environment and infrastructure. Lastly, we wanted to state unequivocal support for the statement that marginalized communities and peoples have historically faced disproportionate impact from climate change, and that this must be addressed in coastal adaptation planning statewide. So thank you to the OPC, the OST, and the members of the task force for working on this document. We at USC Sea Grant look forward to the adoption of this draft and circulating it to our coastal partners. Thank you so much for your time.
Spencer Sachs, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Spencer Sachs on behalf of the California Association of Sanitation Agencies. We wanted to take this opportunity to support the approval of the guidance, specifically the removal of the extreme risk scenario and the inclusion of adaptive approaches to mitigating risk to sea level rise. We look forward to continuing to work with the Council on sea level rise and appreciate the hard work on this issue. Thank you.
Lily Sukiyama, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you. I actually submitted slides to show with my comments.
One moment.
Thank you.
Your slides are coming up.
Great. I'll start.
Please.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to provide comments. My name is Elise Gayama with the Port of San Diego. The Port appreciates OPC on the science and policy update, as it is important to have California-specific scenarios to use in planning. While the Port is concerned about the recommendation to use the high sea level rise scenario, we appreciate that the guidance acknowledges the unique characteristics of ports and harbors and emphasizes flexibility. Next slide, please. Although we have concerns with the scenarios, we are not waiting action. We are actively engaged in building our portfolio of nature-based solutions to enhance climate resiliency while providing environmental and community co-benefits to the region and future generations. There are 2 projects I'd like to highlight that help to stabilize our shorelines. Next slide, please. Through our Blue Economy Incubator, we partnered with eConcrete to replace riprap with interlocking tide pools composed of bioenhancing concrete. Since deployment over 2 years ago, this project has observed an increase in biodiversity as compared to riprap, all while providing protection to the adjacent recreational area. This project was awarded the Innovative Partnership Award at the Climate Leadership Awards in Cleveland. Next slide, please. At the Chula Vista Wildlife Reserve, we have piloted a native oyster living shoreline project to reduce shoreline erosion and restore native Olympia oyster populations. After 1 year, the pilot project has met our science-based success criteria of recruiting the native oysters at statistically significantly higher densities. Next slide, please. Given these successes of our nature-based shoreline pilot projects, we recently kicked off a sustainable shoreline atlas in partnership with the Navy. This will identify more nature-based shoreline solutions around San Diego Bay to continue to promote coastal resilience and environmental benefits to the biodiverse ecology of our bay. Thank you for your time, and we hope that we can collaborate with the OPC in the future on innovative solutions for our shorelines. We would love to provide you more details on these exciting nature-based solutions. Thank you.
Samuel Casillas, you have the floor.
Hi, my name is Samuel Casillas from the Pedro Point Community Association in the city of Pacifica. First, we'd like to commend the guidance now for the high risk scenario. But also, I think we should be very aware that we should be planning actually towards the much higher scenario. So I actually am disappointed that we got rid of or you all got rid of the H++ scenarios, because of the fact that the burning of fossil fuels have actually risen and global warming continues to break records. So we have that. And I also want to make sure that what we're talking about here, because we're hearing sort of different things from our city leaders saying that you guys are actually lowering sea level rise guidance, so then therefore we're buying more time. So are we actually lowering sea level rise projection or adjusting to the probabilities, which I think it is? Also, a better definition of what high risk and low risk applications are, because the way we see it right now, sort of anything that you're building up against the ocean, those should be very high risk, and then the H++ scenario should be coming back into play. And then finally, want to get a clarification if within this draft, are there clarifications of the impact of hard armoring on adjacent beaches due to wave force deflection and the science behind that? Thank you very much.
Emily Parker, you now have the floor.
Good afternoon, council members. My name is Emily Parker, and I am the coastal and marine scientist with Heal the Bay, a nonprofit organization dedicated to clean, healthy, and safe water in the greater Los Angeles region. I'd like to begin by offering our support for the State of California Sea Level Rise Guidance 2024 Science and Policy Update. Back in March, Heal the Bay submitted written comments on the draft guidance, and we're glad to see some of our recommendations reflected in the final guidance document. Particularly, we'd like to thank staff for including additional clarification on the H++ scenario, adding information and visualizations on the adaptation pathways, and adding in flexibility and recognition of the role in local government planning and design when implementing sea level rise strategies. As a researcher and advocate who regularly visits the beaches of Southern California for both monitoring projects and for recreation, I've seen firsthand the impacts that sea level rise and coastal erosion are already having on our coast. Beaches that we use to monitor human activities in marine protected areas and to collect water samples for environmental DNA analysis are quite literally disappearing before our eyes. As you've already heard from other commenters and from staff today, sea level rise predictions are beyond alarming, and preparing for the high scenarios is essential. The inclusion of social equity, environmental justice, and the needs of underserved and vulnerable communities as the focal point of the policy recommendations in this document is commendable, especially as this document will serve as an example for other states as they also plan for sea level rise. Heal the Bay supports the specific and actionable steps that are outlined for decision makers to ensure sea level rise strategies are equitable and take into account the needs of underserved communities. This guidance document contains information and recommendations to get our entire coastline on the necessary path to mitigation, and specifically, we must prepare and plan for extreme scenarios. I again thank the council and staff for this document and support the recommendation to adopt the guidance today. Thank you.
Mark Gold, the floor is yours.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dr. Mark Gold from NRDC. To start off, first of all, I just want to really congratulate the team of the Sea Level Rise Science Task Force, Ocean Science Trust, and the Ocean Protection Council for their job on this guidance document. Please approve it. It's been greatly strengthened since the 2018 version. The other thing that I'm heartened to see is it's actually been greatly strengthened since the comment period, and that's not something you often see by government, and deserves congratulations for that as well. You've heard from many people about the importance of the various different scenarios that were provided on intermediate, high, and high. And really making sure that that's analyzed in all planning and project work moving forward. The guidance on planning with the 6 steps is very, very thoughtful, and I think very helpful in that regard. The guidance also to make sure that one is looking at the 100-year flood, I think is incredibly important, and that the high scenario should be applying to critical infrastructure, intermediate high to actual buildings themselves, and then intermediate to things like trails and benches and perhaps habitat. I think that's really important. So, you know me well enough to know I'm not always positive, so I'm going to have a little bit of negative here. And in that regard, I think there needs to be a clear stated nexus with the state action plan, and that was something that I think was a lost opportunity there. And although the policy stuff was very strong, and then the other thing is to be a lot more direct and specific in how to actually apply high tide flooding, swell height, El Nino temperatures, 100-year storms to the guidance. To think that cities and counties and even state agencies are going to be able to do that well on their own without more prescriptive requirements or guidance on how to do that, I think is deeply concerning. And so that's something that NRDC has basically brought up from the very beginning. I think there was an attempt to at least better explain that within the document. But at the end of the day, what is everyone going to do when you already see so many LCPs have not been completed? We've really seen coastal resilience planning all over the map. And so that's my big concern there, is that there's not quite enough direction on how to make sure that we're actually protecting life, property, recreation, and habitat adequately moving forward. Thank you.
Our last 2 commenters will be Ricardo Dukes and then Melissa Hetrick. Ricardo, you have the floor.
I'm sorry. My name is Ricardo Dukes. I'm actually a professor, but also I work with the Multicultural Center of Marin, which we're very close to the Canal District. I'm not sure if any of you guys heard the Canal District, but we're very, very happy about this particular perspective here in terms of looking at the Ocean Protection Council. We've actually been doing this for quite a few years now. We've been working with what we call the Canal Alliance, which is in the area, which is along that canal. Most of those people that are in that particular area are people who are underserved, Latinx community. Just wanted to point out that we're very happy that this is available, looking at this particular grant, but also too that this has a connection to looking at climate justice, but also environmental sustainability, looking at businesses, looking at how people live in certain communities. If you don't know, oftentimes in that canal area, and also talking about Marin County, which is close to Sausalito, a lot of that land is built-in land. And so what is happening is the sea level is rising and those particular buildings and infrastructure actually is lowering. So it's very important for the community to know about this sea level rising and resiliency against this and what we can actually possibly do. So we're very happy to see that this is upon us here and that there's being funding available. And that's about it in terms of the Multicultural Center of Marin. Thank you.
And our last comment will be from Melissa Hetrick. Melissa, you have the floor.
Thank you. Good afternoon, members of the Ocean Protection Council. I'm Melissa Hetrick, Resilience Program Supervisor for the City of Santa Barbara, and I'm now one of 2 full-time positions entirely devoted to adapting to sea level rise and climate hazards at the City of Santa Barbara. I wanted to thank the OPC staff, the Ocean Science Trust, and the Sea Level Rise Task Force in developing this guidance. It's been an incredible amount of work, and I especially want to thank OPC staff for meeting with us on the draft guidance. The City of Santa Barbara is deeply committed to proactively planning for climate change. In 2019, we were one of the first jurisdictions to incorporate sea level rise into development standards in our coastal land use plan. And in 2021, we approved one of the state's first sea level rise adaptation plans. Since then, we've obtained over $5 million in grant funds to launch 4 major adaptation projects for our airport, our waterfront, our harbor, and wastewater infrastructure. And the use of the sea level rise guidance has been very key to our success. And so we appreciate that. We did have one remaining issue, and that's with regard to the use of the high scenario. And our concern with the use of the high scenario really stems from our strong commitment to starting to adapt our community as soon as possible and a need to gain public support for these efforts. In the last 5 years, since the 2018 guidance was put into place, we have witnessed firsthand the negative effects of utilizing extreme sea level rise scenarios and sea level rise planning. We've also witnessed erosion of public trust when community members hear how unlikely these scenarios are and see the projections from these extreme scenarios change dramatically over time. And so our council asks that for critical infrastructure, the intermediate high scenario be used.
Thank you. And that's the end of the commenters who raised their hand at the end of the presentation.
Well, thank you everyone for your input and comments. We'll turn now to the council members for any discussion.
So first, thank you to staff, of course, for this monumental effort to update the 2018 guidance. And we're so grateful to the members of the public who took the time to submit written comment and to show up in person and virtually today. I think overall staff did a really great job finding balance between providing clear recommendations and without being prescriptive to the diverse and distinct communities throughout the state. I want to highlight, thank you so much for the emphasis on prioritizing social equity, environmental justice, and the needs of communities of color, low-income communities, and California Native American tribes. And I noticed, importantly, including it as the first recommendation in the general recommendations in section 4.3, order matters. And often we see environmental justice listed as an afterthought at the end of a laundry list of recommendations. It's promising that the recent advances in scientific monitoring have led to a lot more certainty. I think it's something to celebrate that the best available science is now indicating slightly lower median sea level rise levels by 2050, but the projections are still alarming. I want to echo the public commenters who encouraged us to ensure this does not slow down our planning pace. We still have a short window of opportunity to act and to invest in sea level rise adaptation and innovation. There's just still a lot of uncertainty past 2050, and the data indicate very low confidence that we'll be able to
achieve these aggressive emissions scenarios that bring us anywhere near low, intermediate low, or even intermediate. So thank you to staff for recommending use of the intermediate scenario as a minimum for short-term low-risk projects and analyzing the high scenario for higher risk applications. And I would agree with the public commenters who mentioned encouraging taking a more precautionary approach and using the high scenario as a minimum. I understand concerns from local governments around capacity and funding, but these scenarios map out increases in relative sea level rise and do not include increases in intensity and frequency of what we now consider extreme storm events exacerbated by climate change. I want to comment on, I was interested in what Mark Gold was saying about how to apply the 100-year flood, extreme storms and planning. I think he's right that many communities don't know how to do this, that they need to hire consultants they may not be able to afford. I don't necessarily agree that more prescriptive language makes sense in this guidance. But I wonder, I mean, it's such a complex technical calculation. I wonder if there's something we can explore around providing workshops for local governments or just perhaps more funding. We would just want to make sure that there's consistency around implementing this. What do you think about that? Jenn, Director Eckerle.
Thank you for that. I think that suggestion about doing some type of workshop series on the application of this guidance is a really excellent recommendation. It's something we've been talking about with Dr. Whiteman and at the staff level, really getting this over the finish line and then helping people understand how do you take it from guidance to implementation. And we're not going to do that obviously alone. I'm looking at my colleagues at the Coastal Commission and others who really have that regulatory responsibility to make sure that the guidance is implemented at the local level. But I think that's a fantastic recommendation.
Thank you. Briefly, Controller Cohen is, of course, the state CFO, and she's always concerned about the bottom line. Thank you for mentioning in the report the actual impacts that sea level rise will have fiscally to our state. Hundreds of billions of dollars in potential property damage. And of course, there's still the impacts to our multi-billion-dollar coastal economy. And we know that flooding events and sea level rise exacerbates existing inequities, particularly for historically excluded communities. So we cannot afford to wait to act. This greater certainty that we have through 2050 gives us an opportunity to get ahead of the curve. So I want to encourage local governments who are using this guidance to do just that, to invest in planning and implementation now, and not to think that a few less centimeters of potential median sea level rise really means anything at all. It means that we could put this off or something. That's not the case. In most cases, adaptation will be more and more expensive the longer we wait. Finally, I just want to highlight the quotes that Laura Walsh brought up from Surfrider in her comments. So one was around, without intervention, approximately 24 to 75% of California's sandy beaches could be seasonally or permanently lost due to sea level rise. I just want to take a moment to imagine that. I was thinking, even at that minimum level, 24%, 1/4 of our sandy beaches could be permanently gone. And that's the minimum. Up to the maximum of 75%, that's just like a mind-blowing statistic. Today's once-in-a-lifetime coastal flood could occur annually by 2050 and daily by 2100. This is not something that communities are prepared for. That was illustrated in the graph shared for Alameda that showed exponential growth in flooding days. Most for homes to start to experience that type of flood damage, for streets to become inaccessible, for emergency response to not be able to access these communities. There's just so much capacity building and awareness that we need to spread around that specific issue. And then the other quote was around groundwater rise and specifically affecting the contaminated sites in the San Francisco Bay. Of course, Controller Cohen is the former supervisor for the city and county of San Francisco, specifically in the Bayview Hunters Point neighborhood. She still lives in that neighborhood, and she's very familiar with the issues there around groundwater contamination, very concerning, especially with groundwater rise. And so I just want to encourage staff to elevate these specific quotes in particular when communicating about the updated guidance on social media, when you're presenting in front of other agencies. Just highlight these impact, and there's other great quotes as well, but just to really show the magnitude of sea level rise in California. So just thank you to the team. This is a milestone to celebrate, and I think the next step is identifying more money to actually do all this work, some funding mechanisms, particularly with the unfortunate cut in coastal resilience funding in this year's state budget. So really appreciate all the hard work. Thank you.
The members online, I can't tell if someone has their hand up. Nope.
Did want to give brief comment. I just wanted to start by acknowledging, I know that this was a heavy lift for OPC staff, for OST staff, and also acknowledge all of the amazing work by leading academics to get us to this point. I think given the projections that we're seeing in the latest IPCC report, we know that the negative impacts of human-induced climate change are getting worse. And so taking action to get a plan like this over the finish line and guidance like this over the finish line will allow us to act sooner. And now with better data, because these modeling scenarios, acknowledging there are uncertainties and acknowledging that there's variation across sites, will empower decision makers to have best available information that matches their risk tolerance. I did want to acknowledge some of what I was hearing in public comment around, there's always space, I think, to be more explicit in these types of guidance documents and plans. But also, I think an important part is the first step of updating the scientific guidance and knowing that a lot of what will happen needs to happen in the weeds of implementation. And so issues around impacts to equity, impacts to specific habitats should explicitly be addressed by those local counties and those local plans. And I think that the suggestion that was made about making sure that that's more clear in the rollout can be very supportive in that. But I think we're really on the right track with what's been put forward in this guidance.
Any other further comment? Council.
I really just want to echo what my fellow council members have said in thanking all of the staff who did all of the work to put this together. And on behalf of the secretary, really just extend that appreciation. Sea level rise is a really big thing to get our hands around, figure out our next steps, see where we are at. And this document does a really excellent job of clearly explaining where the science is at and provides some good recommendations and next steps. I do want to just second the recommendations of those workshops and providing a lot of that clarity and that individual guidance to help with providing the local agencies and the cities and the counties with how to actually implement a lot of the actions here. So again, with that, thank you.
Okay, any further comments? Nope. Well, I don't want to just say ditto, but thank you for the staff for all the work. This is kind of very eye-opening for me, so I really appreciate it. Very important document. And so with that, I will ask for a motion.
Happy to make the motion. Do I have to pull it up? You have to say it here, right? 1 second. What do I read?
Yes.
Okay, I will make the motion that the council adopt the State of California Sea Level Rise Guidance 2024 Science and Policy Update to help state and local governments prepare for and adapt to sea level rise.
And I will second.
Wonderful, thank you. Stacey, could you call the roll call for the vote?
Yes, thank you. Stephanie Shamazu,
Aye.
Katie Landau,
Aye.
Christina Campbell,
Yes.
Catherine Moore.
I don't vote.
Oh, I apologize. Alexis Jackson. The council has voted unanimously. The motion passes.
All right. Well, we'll move on to item number 5. I think Ben's going to be presenting this. Okay, number 5 is an informational and action item. Just consideration and approval of disbursement of funds for Senate Bill 1 Sea Level Rise Adaptation Planning Grant Program.
Is that better? Perfect. Okay. Good afternoon, council members. Thank you for your time today. My name is Ben Dorfman. I'm the Sea Grant Fellow with OPC's Climate Change Program. And in coordination with Megan Williams, our amazing staff lead on this project, I'm excited to present item 5, the consideration and approval of disbursement of funds for the Senate Bill 1 Sea Level Rise Adaptation and Planning Grant Program. Next slide, please. So to put it crudely from our first item, California's vulnerable sea level rise. In response to that, in August of 2023, this council approved the disbursement of up to $95.9 million for this SB1 grant program, with the purpose of developing consistent sea level rise adaptation plans and projects to build resilience to sea level rise along the entire coast of California and San Francisco Bay. These projects being brought today are the first projects recommended for funding through this grant program. Eligible applicants include regional, local, and tribal governments. And one final note here is that our accompanying SB1 Technical Assistance Program launched in March of this year. And while there is not TA available in this first round of proposals, we are working with our TA providers to take best practices and lessons learned from this first round, and we'll apply them to all future rounds to ensure the Technical Assistance Program is as effective as possible for future applicants. Next slide, please. So a few more details on how this program is structured. There are 2 tracks of funding, with track 1 for pre-planning and planning projects and track 2 for implementation projects. Track 1 is open now with a non-competitive rolling quarterly basis, and track 2 is going to open later this year. Although we are currently accepting truly urgent proposals for track 2, one of which is being recommended for funding today. Next slide, please. So in this first round, we received a total of 10 proposals asking for more than $10 million. And we are bringing 7 of these 10 to council today, but we do remain engaged with the other 3 proposals. And we're going to continue working with them. And if proper changes and tweaks can be made, hopefully they will resubmit those projects and we can bring them to a future council meeting. Each project was reviewed by OPC staff in coordination with the BCDC and Coastal Commission staff. And we really want to focus on this agency alignment to ensure that each project meets the requirements of a local coastal program or the pending guidelines of BCDC's regional shoreline adaptation adaptation plan, sorry. And this agency collaboration will ensure that each SB1 project will meet the requirements of Senate Bill 272 as well. Slide, please. So here are the 6 track 1 projects being recommended today for nearly $5.4 million. As you can see, the geographic scope is kind of skewed towards Central Coast and Bay Area, but we did have many conversations and significant interest with other outer coast jurisdictions who we believe will apply in later rounds. As we mentioned, the TA program wasn't fully up and running, and we believe that once other jurisdictions are able to utilize this TA program, we will have many more increases in proposals submitted in future rounds. Slide, please. So these 6 projects cover pre-planning, data collection, and detailed adaptation planning. The way that SB1 is set up is that it allows for submittals of large projects that cover all different phases of planning, such as the Contra Costa County Resilient Shoreline Plan, for example, or smaller scale plans that will lead into larger adaptation plans, such as the Sausalito Facility Vulnerability Assessment. Next slide, please. So, and the one recommended Track 2 project for funding today is the Nature-Based Shoreline Adaptation Project at Capistrano State Beach and Doheny State Beach, led by Orange County Parks. It's for a total of $220,000 with leverage non-state funds of, $9,800,000. So the OPC funded portion of this project is key to allow for the larger amount of funding to be used for construction, because that funding cannot be used until final design and permitting is complete. And so I forgot to note the OPC funding will be used for that final design and permitting, as well as tribal and community consulting services. So even though it's a small portion, it will really allow this larger project to move forward quickly, which was the urgency aspect of this project. And next slide, please. So in summary, staff recommends the authorization to disperse up to $5,614,785 to these grantees who submitted successful applications to the SB1 grant program in support of our strategic plan objective 1.1, build resiliency to sea level rise, coastal storms, erosion, and flooding. And last slide, please. Thank you for your time and happy to take any questions you might have today.
I think we'll move to public comment, if there is any.
We do have a virtual public commenter. Mark Gold is on the line. Mark, you have the floor.
Hello again, Dr. Mark Gold from NRDC. You're stuck with me twice in one day after not having me for about 2 years. So really glad to see this moving forward with SB1 and having it be consistent with SB 272. This gets us to the implementation phase that we were talking about is part of the guidance document. And I've talked to staff, and so they've affirmed that my concern has been addressed already. But I just think it's important to bring up to the council here, which is that this funding has to be consistent with criteria that have already been approved by the OPC and the recently approved technical guidance that you just approved about 10 minutes ago. And so that includes the 6-step guidance process and the guidance that we were talking about earlier from the standpoint of looking at intermediate to high scenarios and the like. Hopefully it's consistent with the action plan where pertinent as well, because this is really a great opportunity for OPC, since you're not a regulatory agency, but you actually have an influence on implementation through who you fund and the conditions in your funding. And the fact that that is a condition of this funding is something to be strongly commended and greatly appreciated. And I'm glad that the first round of funding is being done in this manner. Thank you.
Any further public comment?
There are no more virtual commenters.
Great, thank you. All right, so invite discussion from the council.
Yeah, I'm curious, how many applications did you receive in this first round?
So we had 10 total.
Okay.
7 to 10 to council today.
Can you share the reasons why some were not accepted? Were they just not ready yet?
A great question. I'll give an answer and I can give one as well. There are still mostly, for the most part, great projects. There are just a few aspects that need to be tweaked before they can be brought, mostly around schedule and budgets. A few had later start times than we wanted to bring to this council meeting, so just more appropriate to bring them to a future council meeting. Some we had to work with them to make the budgets quite appropriate for this funding program specifically. But we don't want to exclude anybody, because again, the goal is to fund the entire coast of California and San Francisco Bay. So we'll stay in contact with them and hopefully they can submit again and be brought to a future meeting.
That's great. And I think I remember that OPC provides some kind of technical guidance. Can you talk a little bit more about that, just for governments or
Yeah.
applicants who might be interested?
The technical assistance program?
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. So that's a great opportunity. And we actually recommended some of the grantees who we did not bring to council today to go apply to that technical assistance program. It's really just a way to improve their applications and proposals before they officially submit them to ourselves. So yeah, this SB1 technical assistance program with Coastal Quest as our partner on that. And there's information on our website about how to apply. It's a great opportunity to really increase the amount of proposals and quality proposals that we receive.
That's great. It's a fantastic program. This is just so timely with the guidance that we just accepted. There's a ton of money left. This is only $5 grand out of 5 million out of 95 million. So there's a lot of money out there. How would applicants who are interested apply?
Yeah, go to the SB1 webpage on our OPC website. You can also email us at, Megan, I might butcher the email address, just sb1@opc.ca.gov. OPC-SB1 at california.ca.gov is our email address for any questions, as well as the webpage with other information.
That's great. That's all I have. Thank you.
Question. Can you just remind me process wise? So I saw that we're already accepting LOIs for track 2. And also that there was an acknowledgement that funds are limited, and so there's no guarantees around that. Are LOIs required in general across this granting program? I'm just wondering, what this means for like capacity limited organizations that are smaller, that are needing to submit an LOI and then a full proposal, and if that disadvantages any groups. So just, trying to remember.
Yeah, great question. LOIs are not required for track 1 proposals, just for track 2. And once track 2 officially opens, LOIs won't be required. This is really just kind of an interim measure for truly urgent applications. And we had a track 2 proposal submitted a LOI that we did not choose for funding just because it didn't quite line up with the timeline of urgency. But other than that, there could be some imbalances until the track 2 program is really officially open. But we found this to be the best interim solution.
Through the chair, if I might. Just to put a finer point on Ben's answer, we, as you will recall, are trying to, in the initial launch of this program, prioritize the planning projects. And in doing so, however, we did not want to preclude really timely needs around implementation. And so we thought that the LOI process would help us kind of navigate, okay, is this actually something we want to ask someone to come forward with a full proposal for an implementation project? And so the goal was really not to create another barrier at all, but really to make sure we're prioritizing those planning projects, but not missing critical implementation. So just a finer point on that.
Right, members, any further comments or questions? If not, we'll take a motion.
I'll make the motion. I think I can do this. I move that OPC approve the authorization to disperse up to $5,614,785 to various grantees who submitted successful applications to the SB1 Sea Level Rise Adaptation Planning Grant Program for sea level rise adaptation planning or implementation projects. I have to read the projects.
Second.
That on, Stacey, could you please call the roll call for the vote?
Stephanie Shimaz,
Aye.
Katie Landau,
Aye.
Christina Kunkel,
Yes.
Alexis Jackson. I'm sorry, Alexis, I couldn't catch that. Thank you. The council has voted unanimously. The motion passes.
Thank you. Okay, so. Okay, for item 6, Anne, thank you. Okay, so item number 6 is an informational item. regarding the Tribal Nature-Based Solution Grant Program.
Can you hear me okay? Perfect. I'm not tall as men. All right. Good afternoon, Council. My name is Ann Deep. I'm one of the 230 by 30 program managers. It's my honor to be here to present item 6. This item has a very special place in my heart. So to kick us off, OPC is thrilled to announce $1 million in awards to support Team BS projects in advancing tribally led stewardship on the coast. California Native American tribes have stewarded these lands and waters since time immemorial. But unfortunately, through violence, exploitation, dispossession, and state-sanctioned genocide, tribal communities were forcefully separated from their ancestral territories and cultural practices. In spite of this, tribes have never ceded their traditions and obligations to steward the lands and waters. The Tribal Nature-Based Solutions Program was developed out of consultation and input received from California Native tribes during tribal consultations on these state strategies and are part of California's commitment to begin righting historical wrongs. These funds were dedicated to advancing multi-benefit nature-based solutions for tribal priorities and tribal communities. Next slide, please. In January of 2023, the Ocean Protection Council adopted a first-of-its-kind tribal engagement strategy to enhance collaboration with California Native American tribes on the coast and ocean. To support implementation of the strategy, OPC committed up to $1 million to provide dedicated funding to support tribal priorities and support tribally led stewardship through a dedicated tribal small grants program. We combined this with TNBS to reduce burden on tribes and streamline the grant application processes. Next slide, please. Just as an overview, the TNBS program receives strong interest for projects along the coast. Of the final 44 applications to advance for review and scoring, 14 answered explicitly yes to advancing OPC's strategic priorities and are coast and ocean related. And though OPC originally envisioned the $1 million to be made available for tribal small grants, no applicant requested funding below $250,000. So of these 14 proposals, this represents 12 unique tribes totaling $50.62 million in requested funding. This illustrates the high demand and significance for funding and state investment in tribal stewardship and ancestral land return funding in the coast and ocean. Lessons learned indicate we likely need to take a different approach for future funding efforts if our intent is to fund tribal capacity through small grants. Next slide, please. And so as an overview of the two projects OPC will be funding, OPC is awarding up to $500,000 each to Kaipoma and to the YTT Northern Chumash nonprofit in support of the Tribal Nature-Based Solutions projects on California's coast. These project awards are part of the California Natural Resources Agency's broader $107.7 million investment to fund 33 projects and support the return of approximately 38,950 acres of land to California Native American tribes through the TNBS grant program. These awards were announced by Governor Newsom last month. Next slide, please. And so I'll start going over each of these projects, starting with the Blues Beach Management Project and our grantee Kaipoma. Kaipoma is a tribally chartered nonprofit representing 3 federally recognized tribes, the Coyote Valley Band of Pomo Indians, Sherwood Valley Band of Pomo Indians, and Round Valley Indian tribes. The 3 tribes represent a diverse confederation of native peoples of the region, including the Northern Pomo, Yuki, Wailaki, Concow, Little Lake Pomo, Numlaki, and Pitt River. Next slide, please. OPC funding will support Kaipoma in developing a robust management plan for the Blues Beach property, which is 136.2 acres of tribal ancestral land located approximately 1 mile south of Westport and 11 miles north of Fort Bragg and Mendocino County. Through legislation, Caltrans is required to return the property to Kaipoma, and future stewardship and maintenance of this property will be undertaken by the nonprofit. Next slide, please. The goal of this project is to develop a comprehensive restoration plan, which will incorporate the ecological restoration component with cultural activities with the aim to increase biodiversity, restore habitats, and improve wildfire resilience. Supporting activities will include baseline condition assessments of the cultural and ecological resources on the property, consultations with tribal expert on land management, local and tribal engagement, including with youth and elders, and tribal capacity building through workforce development for future land management and project management. Next slide, please. And for our final project, this is for the Yatsmasini Yaksu Conservancy with our grantee YTT Northern Chumash nonprofit. This nonprofit is the Yaktichu Tichu Yaktahini Northern Chumash Tribes legal entity. And in the Tahini language, this means the people of the full moon. Next slide, please. OPC funding will support the development of two plans, the Estuary and Creek Conservation Plan and the Tribally Led Aquaculture Development Plan, along with planning for future ancestral land return of the 357-acre Alexander Ranch property located in Cayucos, California. This is located in San Luis Obispo County, approximately 12 miles north of Morro Bay. Next slide, please. The goal of this project is to build tribal capacity for this future ancestral land return, along with these two plans. This is in partnership with the Land Conservancy of San Luis Obispo, Harmony Coast Aquaculture Institute, and Creek Land Conservation. Not only will this conservation plan seek to restore the estuary and creek on this property, but the tribal-led aquaculture development seeks to also do restoration of culturally important coastal species, such as the California native abalone species. Next slide, please. And so currently, OPC and TMBS staff have already met with awardees to begin the work plan scoping and to finalize grant agreement for grant execution. OPC is really excited to apply lessons learned for the future support of tribal stewardship and capacity building. And with that, thank you.
All right, is there any public comment on this matter?
Good afternoon, Council. My name is Scott Lathrop. I'm a member of the Yaktichu Tichu Yaktahini tribe and serving as the Chief Executive Officer of our tribal nonprofit. And we really excited to be here today to have an opportunity to see you face to face, and also on behalf of the tribe, give a great big shout out and thank you for supporting our overall goal and mission here. What I wanted to do is just go over a couple of quick slides just to kind of give you a little more connection to what you're supporting. First of all, the overall name of the conservancy in English basically is Ocean to Land Conservancy. And as you take a look at the project area, you'll see how that is all connected. First, next slide, I would like to kind of just give you a little bit of background about us as far as our group, our tribal group. We're the only tribal group in San Luis Obispo that is documented to specific village sites in San Luis Obispo County. We are not a federally recognized tribe. We're only a state acknowledged tribe. We're a landless tribe. And with those, I want to say a little bit of restrictions, you might say. It's been a little bit difficult to really elevate our overall recognition in the area. And the idea of getting land back and being able to take the responsibility back as far as stewardship of those lands is a very great and important thing for us. And you can see that our tribal group has been in the area for a long, long time, over 10,000 years. We've never lost our connection to the overall land. We have a saying in our homeland is that we love our homeland and we want you to love it too. So definitely we're open to the concept of welcoming people to our community and sharing our culture and what we're all about. Next slide, please. I wanted to just give you a quick little overview of the project area, starting with the coastline. There's approximately about a half mile to 3/4 of a mile of coastline that is successful in getting the land back will actually put us directly connected to the water, which I guess you could call us water people. To the left of the picture there, you'll see there's some facilities. There was a commercial abalone farm happening there that went out of commission probably about 2015, somewhere in that neighborhood. You'll see in the middle area, those are actually cribs, if you will. That's where they did some growing of abalone. And this facility is one of the items that we would like to be able to take on and put a tribal flavor to it, if you will, as far as bringing it forward. You can see that to the right of the property line, that's state land. There's an estuary there that's been already has taken place there. What we would like to do is kind of bring that into the private property area as far as looking at what we want to do project-wise. And then the property on the other side of Highway 1 would be more of the land conservation aspect of it. So next slide, please. You can see that our project activities, number one for us, number one priority for our tribe is land back. We believe that without land, you're kind of powerless. So it's very important for our tribe to gain land back in our homeland. And so this is definitely one of the 4 major tasks or items or goals that we would be looking at is essentially finalizing a purchase agreement of the property, which is about 370 acres. Looking at creek estuary, creek and estuary conservation. I should highlight the Land Conservancy of San Luis Obispo is premier land conservation group in San Luis. They are a partner of ours to try to make that land back happen. We also have another great partner, Creek Lands Conservation, which they do a lot of creek restoration projects. And aquaculture development, this is kind of exciting for us, looking at maybe growing some seaweed and also growing abalone. We have the Harmony Coast Aquaculture Institute partnering with us. And then this one here, which is really important to us as far as tribal group, is that restoration, coastal invertebrate restoration, trying to bring back essentially abalone to the area. That's kind of a big thing in our culture. And we also want to stress here that we have a real strong desire for collaboration with other tribal groups, and we would say coastal tribal groups, to come together more as a one voice, if you will, and try to share knowledge, things of that nature, and introduce the wider community to our cultures and what our concerns and beliefs are there. So those are kind of like the 4 little project areas that we want to get involved with this project. Next slide, please. This is kind of a tribal vision, our tribal vision. You know, we're always talk about the next 7 generations. I guess if we were looking at that, I'm in kind of like the first generation that's heading out. You know, my kids are the next generation and then my grandkids. So we're really talking currently about 3 generations, but normally tribal groups are always in the mode of 7 generations for planning. And looking at tribal stewardship, ancestral land and ocean, looking at conservation and restoration networks, sustainable aquaculture, looking at learning laboratories. We have a real strong connection with Cal Poly State University. I'm actually a graduate of Cal Poly, so you know we think we have a good connection that has some strong support to help out with that overall aspect. And of course, you can see we're hitting like all the marks, I think, as far as climate resilience, improving public health, increasing equity, and also the protection of biodiversity. So we think we have a real exciting project here. We're excited that we were one of only 2 that were able to secure grant monies. And we're just excited to go to the next step. Next slide, please. And here, I just wanted to give you an opportunity to, you know, ask any questions. I see we have I thought we had the OPC logo on that, so apparently it's missing. But I wanted to end with that, saying that you are now a new partner with YTT. Oh, that's the other thing. It's okay to call us YTT Tribe, you know, if you're having a little tough time with the language. And we would want to welcome you all to our homeland. And definitely, if you're in the San Luis Obispo area, call me, text me, you know, there's a lunch or something coming out of that, because we really look at OPC as a really fantastic state partner. In fact, you're the first that really is of sizable contribution, sizable grant. And so thank you again for that.
Thank you so much for being here and for sharing all that. That was wonderful. Council members, do you have any questions? Drew? Yeah, go.
It's just such an exciting agenda today. Just briefly, Controller Cohen is passionate about supporting compensation for California Native American tribes, and this is a priority for her, especially around ancestral land return and uplifting traditional ecological knowledge. We're thrilled about both of these projects. I just want to take a brief side note that this $1 million and even the $107 million that the governor's allocated is really just a tiny drop toward what we really owe the Native American people in regards to compensation for current participation and capacity building statewide and reparations for past and current injustices. We know that Native Americans know their own ancestral land and how to take care of it better than any of us do. It's just so imperative that we compensate them for their knowledge and incorporate and learn from that expertise from traditional ecological knowledge, and compensate them like we do everybody else. Like when we're doing an EIR, we compensate the water quality experts, we compensate the wildlife experts, we require tribal consultation, but we don't compensate the tribes. So I know that OPC is not the only agency that is doing work around this, that's responsible for this. But OPC has certainly been a leader with the Tribal Marine Stewards Program and other ancestral land returns. I think the item that we'll be considering later for the fishing community, the compensation for their participation in offshore wind was a really creative solution to provide funding in that way. So Director Eckerle, I was wondering if you could talk about what else OPC has in the works, perhaps, and then what else we can do within our capacity to really adequately and abundantly compensate tribes.
Thank you so much for that question. I don't even know where to start. There's so much. This is such an incredible and important priority for us. I will remind everyone that a couple of years ago, this council adopted our first ever tribal engagement strategy. We are actively working to implement all of the actions and the priorities in that strategy. And so that's just, we can come back to the council at a future meeting to talk about kind of progress and next steps and priorities as we implement that. One of the things that was contemplated in that strategy was the establishment of an Coast and Ocean Tribal Council to help us inform the actions that we're taking, really help understand priorities and respect the capacity and the expertise of tribes across the state. So that's something that we're continuing to think through. We're working really closely with the resource agencies, Tribal Affairs Deputy Secretary Geneva E.B. Thompson, actively doing consultation around tribal access, land return, co-management. And that is not only to inform kind of broader resource agency policies and priorities, but the work that we're doing here at the council. We also have one of our 4 strategies in our 30 by 30 approach is specifically focused on tribally led conservation. So that's another place. And then we're also thinking through how do we embed this priority in all of the investments that we're making, not only investments that we heard about today, where we're actually providing funding to tribes for tribal priorities, but also in investments for research or monitoring. How are we making sure that tribal expertise and tribal members and communities and leaders are actually helping do this work? And how are we building the next generation of ocean stewards through that portion? And I don't mean to say that they are the first generation of ocean stewards. What I mean is, how do we help support the workforce development and the ongoing economics through the work that we're doing? And I'll stop there because I could go on for days.
That's great. Just thank you so much. And just want to repeat, OPC really has been a leader in this effort, and you just proved that point. So thanks.
All right, any other input discussions from the members?
We did have somebody awaiting a virtual public comment. It's Eddie Knight.
Thank you.
Eddie, you have the floor.
I want to thank the OPC for inviting me to make a little comment. Bear with me. I am not this kind of a person that can go out and, give a speech and give, I'm more behind the scene person. So my name is Eddie Knight, and I'm a member of the Kylie Valley Band of Pomo Indians. My ancestry is I'm Coastal Yuki, I'm Little Lake, I'm Yoke, I'm Chanel. That is my bloodline. I'd like to start by OPC funded will support Kaipoma in development its management plan for the Blues Beach property. It's 136 acres, 0.2 acres of coastal Yuki tribal ancestral land located approximately 1 mile south of the town of Westport in Mendocino County. Kaipoma is a tribally chartered 501c nonprofit corporation under the Non-Prop Corporation Code, Title 54 of the Hoopa Valley Tribe. Kaipoma, pursuant to California Section 118.9 of the Streets and Highway Code and the California Senate Bill 231, Caltrans is required to return the 136 acres property to Kaipoma, 3 federal recognized tribes, Coyote Valley Banapomo Indians, Sherwood Valley Banapomo Indians, and Round Valley Indian tribes. Kaipoma's board members are delegates from these tribes, ensuring that the project integrates with the core values and insights and our traditionals of our tribes. One thing I want to point out is that all 3 of our tribes are descendants from the coastal Yukis and Yukis. And this is our historic, like you guys mentioned before, this is our historical area. And we've been using this land for centuries. Even today, we use the coastal area in that area excuse me, on the property. But OPC's funding, will support planning to preserve our cultural habitats and our cultural resources. And it will enhance the climate resistance and coastal biodiversity and promote use of traditional ecological knowledge. I had to, when it comes to ecological restoration, I had to look that up to see how it would apply to our ways of doing things. And it turns out it's how my uncles and my grandfather taught me to harvest and protect the ocean. And so it's right in line what we do as natives, not only Kaipoma, but mostly all the Indian tribes in California. We all practice the same thing, and we all love the Mother Earth. My time's up. I just want to say one thing, that Kaipoma means, in our language, means valley people. And I want to appreciate the grant that you guys had awarded us. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And my apologies, I didn't mean to skip over, but thank you so much for calling and sharing all that with us.
Yeah.
Council members, do you have any comments or questions further? Okay. Well, this is an informational item, so we don't need to vote. So I believe we can move on to item number 7. I think Abby. And item number 7 is an informational item. It's the 30 by 30 decision-making framework for coastal waters.
You okay to go? All right. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Abby Mohan, and I am one of the other 30 by 30 program managers here at OPC. And I'm here to talk about 30 by 30. So let's get started. Next slide, please. So in 2020, Governor Newsom committed California to conserving 30% of our lands and waters, putting California at the leading edge of an international movement to protect nature. California's 30 by 30 initiative has 3 main priorities: protect and restore biodiversity, expand access to nature, and mitigate and build resilience to climate change. Next slide, please. In 2022, the California Natural Resources Agency released Pathways to 30 by 30, which details all the strategies on how we're actually going to get there. Pathways defines 30 by 30 conservation areas as an area that is durably protected and achieves biodiversity outcomes. Right now, our state MPA network of 124 marine protected areas covering 16.2% of our coastal waters aligns with the definition of conservation set forth in pathways. Next slide, please. As presented previously, OPC has identified 4 primary approaches to conserving 30% of coastal waters by 2030. Today's presentation centers on the proposed science-based framework to evaluate and advance protection and conservation of California's coastal waters and meet this goal. Next slide, please. So to provide scientific guidance on 30 by 30 implementation, we have also been fortunate to partner with the Ocean Science Trust on forming a technical advisory panel composed of experts working in California and around the world. This is hard stuff. Figuring out the task of how to evaluate biodiversity, expand access to nature, mitigate and build resilience to climate change in coastal waters is not an easy one. The panel has met regularly through the winter and spring to help develop this draft decision-making framework, and they will continue to guide us on this process as we navigate the next steps. Next slide, please. Okay, now the reason we are all excited to be here, the decision-making framework. How do we evaluate area-based management? To develop this framework, we are relying on multiple resources and international guidance, including the MPA guide, the IUCN site level tool, as well as guidance specific to California, including reports to OPC's science advisory team and lessons learned from the first decadal management review of California's MPA network. Next slide, please. So this framework is a 4-step process, and I'm going to walk you through each step. So next slide, please. The first step of the framework is looking at durability. This is fundamental to 30 by 30, and this definition was laid out in pathways. For anything to be durable, it means that it has gone through a formal process and can't be simply undone. Next slide, please. The next step we will do is evaluate biodiversity. For this, we're going to look at breaking up the process into 2 pathways. The first pathway are for those areas that were conserved primarily for biodiversity, for example, the California MPA network or national marine sanctuaries. The second path will be looking at areas created for reasons other than biodiversity conservation. For areas created primarily for biodiversity conservation, we will be using the MPA guide, a science-based, policy-relevant framework that is based on peer-reviewed literature. Next slide, please. Okay, the MPA guide contains specific guidance on what is happening in an area created specifically for biodiversity. When evaluating an area using this guide, you can get 5 outcomes for level of protection. This looks at all the activities that are happening in the area, from oil and gas, aquaculture, infrastructure, fishing, dredging, anchoring, and it looks at all these activities and gets to a level of protection. This can help determine to what extent an area specifically created to conserve biodiversity qualifies as a 30 by 30 conservation area. The first outcome that you could get is that it is incompatible. That just means there's some activity present that is incompatible with biodiversity conservation. The second level of protection you can get is minimally protected. It means there are some protections there, but they don't quite meet that threshold for biodiversity conservation. The third level you can get is lightly protected. The lightly protected area may still qualify if they also provide access and climate mitigation and resilience benefits. The 4th and 5th level of protection are fully or highly protected areas, like our state MPA network, qualify for 30 by 30 because fully or highly protected areas have the greatest potential to protect biodiversity, confer resilience, and benefit species and ecosystems. Next slide, please. For areas that were not created primarily for biodiversity conservation, for example, fisheries management areas, water quality protection areas, we will use the IUCN site level tool for identifying other effective area-based conservation measures. This guide was created because there is a need to evaluate their effectiveness of these sites and to give recognition to what biodiversity benefits they do provide. Next slide, please. So this site looks at areas a little differently than the MPA guide. Rather than looking at the activities and protections that an area has, it first starts with asking the question of the biodiversity value. What biodiversity values exist in that site? What makes this place special? We're very lucky here on the coast of California because most of the areas have something that makes them very special and important to biodiversity. The second thing you evaluate in that area is what are the threats and pressures. For example, if impaired water quality would be detrimental to biodiversity in that area, for example, an estuary or a wetland, what then water quality protections would be critical to address that threat. The third criteria you evaluate is management actions. What regulations, policy, management, and actions and activities are in that area, and do those protections meet those threats and pressures? So that fourth criteria is the likely outcome. Is there a reasonable likelihood that the important biodiversity values for which this site was identified will be conserved in the long term? Next slide, please. So this one doesn't have 5 outcomes. It has a very clear yes or no. And if you get the answer of no, the site does not qualify as an OECM. It has no reflection on the effectiveness of that site and doing what it was created to do, but it just isn't providing sufficient biodiversity benefits to qualify without additional action. For example, removing a threat or a barrier to qualifying. If you get a yes, the site qualifies as an OECM. It will then go on to the next 2 steps in this process. So if you go to the next slide, please. So step 3 and step 4 are to evaluate the access and climate mitigation and resilience benefits in every area that is being evaluated in coastal waters. We'll go through this process. Next slide. So I just packed a lot of information in a very few minutes. A lot more detail on this presentation and process can be, and how we're going to perform an evaluation can be found in our 30 by 30 draft decision-making framework for coastal waters that was released today. And if you go to the next slide, but today kicks off a very robust 120-day public comment period with many different ways for the public to engage on this process. After today, our next opportunity will be a webinar that we're going to be presenting on June 20th. Then we're going to hit the road and go to Southern California in July, Central California in August, and up in Northern California in September, and do some regional workshops. After that, we will have a closeout webinar, and then we will take all of this public comment and bring that and evaluate that and go back to our technical advisory panel and refine this draft decision-making framework. And I look forward to coming back to the council in December and presenting a final decision-making framework for 30 by 30 with hopefully some preliminary evaluation results. And so with that, next slide, you can take questions.
Thank you so much. Do we have any public comment on this item?
Hello again, Laura Dehan, State Director for Environment California. Wanted to thank the CNRE staff and Ocean Protection Council and the TAP, the Technical Advisory Committee, everybody who helped work on creating this framework. Overall, we think that it's clearly a really thoughtful process and clear process that's been laid out. And we really appreciate the adoption of the internationally recognized evaluation tools like the MPA guide and the IUCN OECM tool. The big point I wanted to convey is just that as the evaluations happen, we wanted to urge the Ocean Protection Council to really meaningfully work toward making sure that we are doing everything that we can to protect more of the ocean right now. So we're really grateful that there's this adaptive management process underway right now at the Fish and Game Commission for the existing Marine Protected Area Network. And I think there's a real opportunity for the Fish and Game Commission to expand and strengthen our Marine Protected Area Network. And that can be a real pathway for us to protect more of the coast. And that will be really important, whether we do it through the MPA process or with OECMs or these other pathways. Because of the threats that the ocean are facing, right? We're not just seeing sea level rise because of global warming, we're seeing a lot of impacts on ocean health. I just saw a study that hasn't been released yet, but was so startling. It's under final review that showed that marine heat wave events are likely to double in the short term and then increase as much as 16 times in severity and in intensity by the end of the century, which just underscores, I think, the need for more ocean protections. We know it's one tool in providing more resilience in the face of climate change. So we'll put in more detailed comments in the comment period, but thank you for the work.
Hi, everybody. Director Eckerle, members of the council, thanks for the opportunity to speak today. My name is Scott, and I'm the Advocacy Director at the Resource Renewal Institute, and I've been co-spearheading a robust coalition to address the bycatch in the California set gillnet fishery over the last few years. I'm here to update you that our coalition of ENGOs, small businesses, and youth advocacy groups are excited to engage with your staff during this comment period to identify potential OECMs, particularly increasing protections in the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. Over the last year, my colleagues and I have been providing updates to the OPC regarding our advocacy. We have been extensively working with the California Fish and Game Commission and the California legislator, sponsoring Assemblymember Bennett's legislation. Assemblyman Bennett paused this legislation this year while the Fish and Game Commission adopted its management package, and we are very grateful for CFW's hard work on this and excited for the upcoming Fish and Game Commission meeting discussion. One key aspect of our past and future legislation is ending an exemption in the Fish and Game Code that allows gillnets to be used within the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary state waters. This sanctuary, a unique biodiversity hotspot, should receive more, not less protection for the rest of the state. It is important to note this fishery is relatively small, with under 20 people landing the majority of the fish. In fact, according to CFW landings data, only a mere 8% of landings occur within the Channel Islands. While we anticipate legislation being reintroduced in 2025, we're excited to work with the OPC on potential synergies to increase protection in the Channel Islands National Marine Sanctuary. Addressing the use of gillnets in the sanctuary presents a significant opportunity to bolster biodiversity, increase protection within national marine sanctuaries, and bring the state closer to conserving 30% of our waters by 2030. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Joss Hill from the Pew Charitable Trusts. Thank you for your ongoing leadership in protecting our coastal waters. We submitted some written comments also, but Pew hopes that 30 by 30 in California will seek to mitigate the threats most impacting the state's valuable lands and waters and supports strong decision-making framework. And so this will set a precedent for conservation outside of the marine protected areas. And as such, we're really pleased to see the use of the international tools like the other effective conservation measures. Just wanted to highlight also, it is important to consider the land-based impacts on nearshore waters. For example, incompatible development, water pollution, as we've heard, pose a major threat to tidal wetlands, eelgrass meadows, and overall estuary health, and sometimes more than impacts from unsustainable fishing. Additionally, as we've heard a lot about today, sea level rise means will have impacts too. It means eelgrass meadows and tidal wetlands need room to migrate towards the land. And so as such, we need coordination with these other processes, 30 by 30 processes. So we've got to prioritize coordination across the state government agencies and tap into expertise and experience across agencies, research institutions, NGOs, stakeholders, and tribal nations. So Pew is coordinating with scientists who have deep knowledge of estuarine ecology and management interventions in California. And we and our science partners are interested in working closely with OPC and its technical advisory panel to ensure estuaries, coastal wetlands, and bays in California are durably protected. And so we're looking forward to engaging in this upcoming process. So thank you again for your commitment to protect California's coastal waters.
Good afternoon, council members and Director Eckerle. I'm Sandy Ellsworth with NRDC, and I wanted to first thank OST, OPC, and the TAP members for developing the draft decision-making framework. This framework is essential to ensure that 30 by 30 implementation in California is scientifically driven and meets the objectives of the 30 by 30 executive order. NRDC is supportive of the use of the MPA guide and IUCN OECM tool as evaluative frameworks. These will enable the state to be explicit about the quality of its 30 by 30 conserved areas, which is crucial to California's role as a global 30 by 30 leader. We support OPC's recognition that fully or highly protected MPAs have the greatest potential to protect biodiversity, confer resilience, and benefit species and ecosystems. We do have concerns about the implications of counting lightly protected areas with at least one access and climate benefit. If designated as conserved, monitoring to ensure that a lightly protected area achieves ecosystem conservation goals will be essential. We look forward to reviewing the additional guidance to evaluate access and climate benefits, and we hope that these benefits are prioritized across all 30 by 30 conserved areas. On access, we appreciate that the draft framework acknowledges that access to the ocean refers to a wide range of ocean activities. In California, the vast majority of ocean recreators enjoy the ocean through non-consumptive uses. Access to thriving ocean life is something we believe all Californians should be able to experience. Lastly, we want to recognize the OPC team's dedication to public engagement throughout 30 by 30 implementation. Thank you for connecting with and listening to our organization, our partners, subject matter experts, tribes, and community members. We very much appreciate your efforts to be transparent and inclusive. NRDC looks forward to participating in the public comment period and to supporting the OPC team as needed. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Keith Rootsart, the founder of the Giant Kelp Restoration Project in Monterey. 30 by 30 is supposed to be 30% of the land and 30% of the ocean conserved. And these picturesque brochures and plans are what happens when the public can't see below the waves and the invisible need for ocean conservation. And the state can't afford to take action. National marine sanctuaries only conserve marine mammals, water quality, and submerged lands. And by IUCN Criterion 6, would likely not qualify as protected. Protection is not really protection. There are various degrees of conservation. A state marine reserve is protected, but why is a state marine conservation area where overfishing is allowed considered protected? How are urchin barrens in our best places benefiting biodiversity? If this auditorium were infested with termites, we wouldn't be giving them all first names. What are we protecting? How do we go from 9% to 30% ocean protection without spending 0.1% of our 30-30 funding that we spend on land? Rebrand. Ashes for trees. Hot air for a cool breeze. Pink Floyd said that. For most of the California coast, kelp forests are past the tipping point. Acting 7 years ago would have been better, but now we'll have to do. The restoration movement is a paradigm shift, a regenerative fishery. People reimagining their role in conservation, making the ocean better than we found it. Let's really begin. Thank you.
Thank you. Do we have any public comment online?
We do, but can you give us a second? We're rejoining to the public comment area.
Yeah, absolutely.
We've lost internet on my laptop, and so we're looking for a solution to get to our 8 public commenters that are awaiting us.
You went. Well, since we're waiting, maybe it would be a good time to take a break. 5 minutes. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute break, right? Thank you.
Microphone check. Microphone check.
Microphone check. All right, we're back in business. Okay, can everybody hear me okay? All right, we do have 6 public commenters virtual now. We have Alan Alward, Devin O'Dea, Emily Parker, Larry Phillips, Rebecca Schwartz-Lesberg, Tom Hafer, and also Darren Gertler. Looks like the others are rejoining, and our last commenter will be Marcus Smith. Alan Alward, you have the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, my name's Alan Allward, and I'm a commercial fisherman. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Okay. Yeah, I would like to see OPC and the Fish and Game Commission research 2 things. One would be along the lines of cultural diversity. Research what has happened to the number of commercial fishing licenses in this state since the year 2000 and see if there's any pattern there. And then the other thing I would like you to research is whether or not there is any overfishing or unsustainable fishing going on in California. I think that those are 2 things that would really inform this discussion if you had the answer to those 2 research questions. Thank you.
Devin O'Dea, you have the floor.
Hi, thank you. My name is Devin O'D. I'm the Western Policy and Conservation Manager for Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, a nonprofit organization. And appreciate the opportunity to comment here. One point that I wanted to emphasize is just the application of the local science and the local measures that we have here in California to manage our fisheries. And when we're taking an international tool, just being cognizant of those regulations and councils and mechanisms that we currently have in the state managing our fisheries, and one of the most highly regulated and managed fisheries in really in the world. And so making sure that we're applying those local measures to this international guide is really important, and really trying to get specifics there on where we're looking at particular national marine sanctuaries or MPAs or what have you, areas of special biological significance, and being sure that we're comparing those within the Pacific Fisheries Management Council and NOAA and all those existing bodies of regulations that really safeguard our fisheries. The other point that I wanted to make is just that really taking a closer look at water quality and pollution, and emphasizing the role that conservation designations such as areas of special biological significance can play in our conservation measures. And the OPC has in their strategic plan improving water quality protections in MPAs, and we're considering these areas fully or highly protected, but they're still having raw sewage dumped into them. So I want to just emphasize the role that ASBS can play, and how we elevate that through this process. And 30 by 30 is really important as we look to strengthen and improve the water quality measures that we have here in California, and how we can strengthen those throughout the network. So thank you.
Good afternoon, council members. This is Emily Parker with Heal the Bay. I'll keep my comments brief for this item as we are still reviewing the framework. I just wanted to quickly thank the OPC staff and particularly the 30 by 30 program managers, Abby and Ann, and the technical advisory committee for the incredible amount of work that was put into creating this framework for achieving 30 by 30 in California's coastal waters. The use of the MPA guide and the IUCN site tool for OECMs as a part of the 4-step process for both developing the 30 by 30 baseline, but also scoping and evaluating additional 30 by 30 conservation areas to get us to that 30% goal is a smart science-based approach. And we're supportive and very interested in diving more into both the climate and access sub-frameworks that will inform this process even further. I'd like to finally particularly commend staff for their level of outreach and engagement on this item. We've already heard a little bit about this today from other commenters, but we've already met with staff and are really looking forward to participating in the regional workshops and providing more in-depth comments. So that's all for now. Thank you again. We're really excited to get into the weeds on the framework during the impending comment period. Thank you.
I think you're ready for me now. Larry Phillips, American Sport Fishing Association. Hello, Director Eckerle, members of the council. I just also want to echo the appreciation for the transparency and the approachability here from folks that are launching this process. We look forward to providing written comments and participating, but I did want to share a few thoughts here today. We all agree that we're in crisis mode regarding biodiversity. Because of this, American Sport Fishing Association was quick to sign in support of America the Beautiful through the Biden administration, federal version. We're encouraged that America the Beautiful didn't categorically exclude areas, specifically national marine sanctuaries, from consideration as protected and allow responsible recreational fishing management. The recreational fishing industry has a strong history of conservation. I mean, you can look at the Sport Fish Restoration Act. The conservation efforts by our industry continue today. Some of you may have seen the news release Monday regarding the collaboration between NOAA and the charter industry titled California Charter Boats Contribute to Rockfish Research, Supporting Sustainable Fishing. It was pretty exciting. 2023, 22 charter boats collected biological data from over 4,000 rockfish that are necessary to assess stock status and inform future management. And we certainly need more of those programs. There's also numerous examples of voluntary restrictions adopted by the industry, time, gear, place, bag limits, that the fishermen see as critical to long-term sustainability of our stocks and fisheries. And my point there is that there's 2.1 million recreational anglers that care about the health of our environment in the oceans. Recreational anglers have the potential to be strong advocates for policies that address losses and threats to biodiversity. And we certainly look forward to partnering with OPC and others on a process that identifies the threats to biodiversity and mitigates the impacts through collective advocacy. Our hope is that we identify a path forward that we can all support and is the best approach to protecting and enhancing biodiversity. We look forward to working with you more. Thank you.
Rebecca Schwartz-Lesberg, you have the floor.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, thank you. So my name is Rebecca Schwartz-Lesberg. By title, I am the president of Coastal Policy Solutions. I'm a marine scientist and coastal ecologist. I wanted to first overall echo many other commenters and my thanks to the staff from OPC and OST and the technical advisory panel for a science-based approach to developing these guidance. It's imperative that the final product is adaptive and able to consider both current and emerging science as we consider additional areas for inclusion in 30 by 30. As the national and international community seeks to achieve their own 30 by 30 goals, they will be looking to California to set the bar, and it's our responsibility to set it high. I appreciate the work that has gone in so far, and I look forward to seeing the additional details that come out through the public workshop process. A couple of specific notes. I wanted to further give kudos for building on existing efforts through the MPA guide and the OECM site site-specific tool rather than starting from scratch. There's a lot of good information out there, and so I commend you all for relying on that. In the final framework, I would encourage you to include information from the MPA guide and the OECM tool in the document itself to make accessibility and readability, have it all in the same place. As a totally detailed request, and as somebody who cites these types of documents all the time, please include a recommended citation at the beginning, and also bring the final framework and candidate areas to the December OPC meeting so that members of the public know that they're weighing in on both the framework and the recommended areas. Finally, while the additional guidelines about access and climate change and the additional guiding questions will, it says that it will be available at the workshop, I also ask that they be available outside of the workshops as soon as they're ready for groups that are working to provide input outside of the workshop format, specifically the group of estuary scientists that Pew referenced earlier. I'll be working with them to coordinate that, and I know we have a lot of people who are interested in reviewing the framework. So thank you so much. I was able to be there in person with you this morning or for the first half, but had to leave for some childcare responsibilities. And so I also thank you for providing these additional avenues for public comment on Zoom. Please don't ever let Zoom comment go away. Thank you all so much. And I'm sure you'll hear from me later during the workshops.
Tom Hafer, the floor is yours.
Do you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. All right, I'm Tom Hafer. I'm the president of the Morro Bay Fishing Organization of Morro Bay. Commercial fishermen. You know, we have 29 MPAs on the South Central right now. They've already taken away all of our best fishing areas. We don't see the threat. Why do everybody think we need more MPAs in our oceans? You know, if you start putting more MPAs in, it's going to put a lot of us out of business. We already have 2 years of salmon closures. We have a quillback closure from the 36th line to Oregon. Crab season shut down, short season. It's been that way for a couple of years. You guys want to put a bunch of wind turbines in the ocean. That's going to take another 400 miles away. We just don't understand what you guys have against commercial fishing. Because if you keep doing all this stuff to us, you're going to kill commercial fishing in California. What are we down to, 2,500 guys right now? Where's the threat? There's no threat. We have quotas. We have size limits. We have days of the week. We have seasons. I don't get where all this bullshit is coming from all these people that want to save the damn ocean. And don't forget, we're the commercial fishermen. We've been here for a long time. I don't know what you guys are trying to do. You know, maybe we need a little bit of social justice for the fishermen because we got nothing. All you guys want to do is put us out of business. And if that's the plan, maybe you guys should just buy all the commercial fishermen out in California and just be done with it. Because you start talking more MPAs, there's not going to be anywhere to fish. And when we can fish, it'll be overfished. What don't you guys get? I don't know what to even say about this. This is completely ridiculous.
Darren Gertler, you now have the floor.
Hello, good afternoon. Thank you so much for making this meeting happen and for allowing public input via Zoom. I'm calling from Santa Cruz, California. I am a Santa Cruz Harbor Port Commissioner, and I'm really waiting with bated breath to hear about the Central Cal workshop that's scheduled for August. I haven't seen any time or location or date yet. As a father and school teacher, I got to plan things pretty early. I'm really hoping also at this workshop and future workshops there is an emphasis and emphasis avenue and an arena for some youth participation. I've been to a few of these phone calls and a few of these meetings and a few of these workshops. And to me, it almost feels like some of them are designed to exclude the youth voice. And I think that now we've all learned the lesson by now, and it's very important to work actively in order to enable and encourage those that are going to be the future of our resources and our stewardship. So thank you so much. I'm going to side my time to any other speakers here. Thank you. Bye.
Our last two speakers will be Mark Smith and Matt Bond. Mark, you have the floor.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, Mark Smith on behalf of the Coastal Conservation Association of California. Want to echo comments that have previously been made by Devin and Larry, and I know Matt will follow up here. I just want to emphasize a couple additional points that I think were alluded to but weren't directly addressed. Recreational anglers are not the enemy. And sometimes in these conversations, it can feel like we are. Understand that there are many, many pressures that are affecting our oceans and the health of our oceans. And the vast majority of them have absolutely nothing to do with recreational or angling take in any way, shape, or form. There are limited levers that you can pull in response to some of those pressures. We just urge you to work with our communities to understand our needs and to drive pathways forward for win-win solutions. I'd like to remind everybody that 30 by 30 is not just about 30 by 30, it's also about increasing access. This is a key component of the 30 by 30 executive order, and it is something that the governor talks about all the time when he talks about this issue. Closing recreational fisheries, an opportunity for folks, is not creating additional access. Further, the charter boats that were previously discussed are, for many people, their only source of access to this resource. These communities must work hand in hand in order to fulfill the obligations and the mission and the vision that the governor has for 30 by 30. And finally, I'll say that it's great that you're doing listening sessions up and down the state, but come talk to us. The recreational angling community gets together in massive events annually throughout the year at fishing shows up and down the state of California. Come to the spaces where we as a community are. It's often very hard for people to get to you, particularly people like the charter boat captains who are out on the water working during the day, during the time that you're having these meetings. We've invited you to come. We encourage you to come, and we look forward to having additional dialogue with you. Thank you very much for the opportunity to make comment today.
Our final commenter, Matt Bond, you have the floor.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity. My name is Matt Bond. I'm with All Waters, a access and sustainability coalition. And as Mark said, I want to support and echo what Devin said, what Larry said, what Mark said. I want to echo what Scott from RRI said about looking at different ways to look at specific fisheries within big zones like the Channel Islands and maybe have those count. But most importantly, I want to bolster the part that Mark said about access. Access is critical. It's Men's Mental Health Awareness Month, and I can speak from personal life experience how important access to fishing, to being out on the ocean, to putting sustenance on the table can mean for so many people. And so it's really important as we look at the variety of areas to protect our resources that need protecting, that we really do consider each one of those three drivers: biodiversity, climate change resilience, and access equally. I wanted to echo what the person from Pew said. And back to Devin's speech, water quality is overriding, and those estuaries that the people from Pew are looking at protecting are the buffer, and they're the nurseries for the fish that are out there. And I was very happy to see the interconnected nature of 30 by 30 and the way the protections are supposed to work together. I want to make sure this process follows through with that, and the land interchanged with the coastal waters and streams and estuaries are protected. Lastly, just a point of interest, we've had great conversations with the team. I want to make sure that we really understand with clear written guidance how the NPA guide is going to be modified as opposed to being an international guideline, but more specifically to address California itself. So with that, thank you very much. Look forward to continuing more specific comments in the 120-day period.
Thank you. That's the last of our virtual commenters.
Discussion on this item. We'll move on to item number 8. I think Maya's going to present. And please note that the next 3 items relate to offshore wind development, and we will take a combined public comment and council discussion after the presentation on item 8C. So this is the informational and action items related to offshore wind development in California.
Good afternoon. My name is Maya Shu. I'm an executive fellow with the California Natural Resources Agency, and today I'll be providing a status update on offshore wind development in California. Next slide, please. I wanted to begin by addressing the question of why California is pursuing offshore wind. In 2018, California passed Senate Bill 100, which requires California to receive renewable energy and zero carbon resources to supply 100% of electrical retail sales by 2045. And achieving this goal is going to require significant changes to the state's infrastructure and energy portfolio. Offshore wind has emerged as a potential key component of California's renewable energy strategy, with some of the highest wind resources in the world located off the state's north and central coasts. Offshore wind also presents a unique opportunity for large-scale renewable energy production. And in light of all this, the California Energy Commission, or the CEC, has established planning goals of 2 to 5 gigawatts of offshore wind by 2030 and 25 gigawatts by 2045. And for reference, 1 gigawatt of offshore wind can supply the electric demand for about 1 million homes in California. Next slide, please. California recognizes that offshore wind is an emerging industry with potential impacts to the environment, tribal cultural resources, and coastal communities, including fishermen and underserved communities adjacent to ports. As the state is looking to understand, avoid, and mitigate these impacts, the Ocean Protection Council is prioritizing research, environmental monitoring, and outreach to California Native American tribes and coastal communities. OPC is currently managing a project with the California Marine Sanctuary Foundation to develop environmental monitoring guidance for offshore wind development. As part of this effort, OPC is conducting government-to-government consultations to ensure that tribal priorities are incorporated into the guidance. OPC has also issued a call for nominations for tribal scientists to participate in the development of the guidance. And OPC is also looking to establish a comprehensive research and monitoring program to guide environmentally responsible and science-based offshore wind development in the state. Next slide, please. So to provide an overview of the leasing process, there are currently 5 offshore wind lease areas in federal waters off the coast of California. In 2021, the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management, or BOEM, designated 2 wind energy areas, one off of Humboldt and one off of Morro Bay. In December of 2022, BOEM held a competitive lease sale, and in the following June, the 5 leases were signed. And in April earlier this year, Secretary of the Interior Deb Haaland announced BOEM's 5-year offshore wind leasing schedule, with new leases in California expected in late 2027 or early 2028. Next slide, please. BOEM is also conducting a programmatic environmental impact statement, or a PEIS, to evaluate impacts from offshore wind development in federal waters off the coast of California. OPC and other departments are currently meeting with BOEM about this document, and BOEM anticipates releasing a draft for public comment in fall of this year. Next slide, please. To give a snapshot of lessee activities, lessees have submitted their fisheries and agency communication plans and their first progress reports. BOEM is currently reviewing their tribal communications plans, and additional progress reports will be submitted every 6 months. Lessees are also preparing for or already conducting surveys and site assessments, and the results from these activities will inform lessees' construction and operation plans, which will be submitted to BOEM in the coming years and will trigger project-specific state and federal environmental reviews. Next slide, please. And shifting to state activities, OPC has been contributing to the development of the Offshore Wind Strategic Plan, which is required by Assembly Bill 525. And OPC has been collaborating with the Governor's Senior Advisor on Offshore Wind, CNRA Tribal Affairs and Environmental Justice Deputy Secretaries, the Coastal Commission, the Department of Fish and Wildlife, and the State Lands Commission, as well as the Energy Commission. And while preparing this report, the Energy Commission created a working group to solicit tribal feedback and also conducted targeted outreach to fisheries, underserved communities, and coastal communities. A draft strategic plan was released in January of this year, which triggered a nearly 4-month public comment period. And during that time, the CEC hosted 2 public workshops to provide more detail on the content of the strategic plan and to solicit feedback to incorporate in the final draft. Next slide, please. So the strategic plan covers the following topics: potential impacts to marine resources, tribes, fishermen, national defense and underserved communities, sea space for future offshore wind development, port and waterfront infrastructure needs, workforce development needs and opportunities, transmission, and permitting. Next slide, please. So as offshore wind development progresses, different departments under the Natural Resources Agency and throughout the state will have a variety of roles and responsibilities. The CEC is expecting to adopt a final strategic plan at one of its summer business meetings. And then the Coastal Commission, the State Lands Commission, and the Department of Fish and Wildlife will all be responsible for permitting, survey, site assessment, and construction activities. Once lessees submit their construction and operation plans, the State Lands Commission will also be conducting a California Environmental Quality Act or CEQA review. And as mentioned before, OPC will be overseeing the development of environmental monitoring guidance and also working to establish a comprehensive research and monitoring program for offshore wind development in the state. And finally, the agency and its departments will continue to collaborate with BOEM and other federal agencies, tribal nations, and other external partners as offshore wind leasing and development activities continue. Next slide. Thank you so much.
I just have to say, Maya, that was absolutely incredible. I don't know if anyone else could see that she just did that entire presentation without any notes. That was absolutely incredible. Well done.
Well, I have no. I have notes. Full disclosure. Good afternoon again, council members, and I am honored here today to be presenting the California Fishermen's Resiliency Association project. Next slide. For background, as offshore wind development has evolved in California, as you just heard from Maya, the need for a more unified approach from California's commercial fishermen also emerged. To meet this need, the California Fishermen's Resiliency Association, or CFRA, was formed in 2022 to represent the collective interest of commercial fishermen. The focus of the CFRA is on preventing, minimizing, and mitigating impacts from offshore wind development, wave energy development, oil, gas, mineral mining, and energy and data transmission cables. CFRA started with a little bit more of a North Coast focus, but today CFRA has expanded membership across the state from Santa Barbara to Del Norte counties, including a board of directors representing 12 California fishermen's associations. Commercial Fishermen's Associations. We're lucky to be joined here today by Ken and Linda Bates, who made the trek down from Humboldt. Next slide. OPC has previously provided funding to CFRA starting in 2022 as part of what we have been calling a phase 1. During this time, CFRA has made considerable progress and accomplishments, including 2 draft community benefit agreements, one on offshore wind and the other on transmission cable focus. two white papers, one on the value of fishing grounds and the other focused on offshore non-fishing developments in Northern California. Recently, CFRA has played a critical role in the facilitation and engagement with the California Coastal Commission 7C working group, which was formed in response to the Coastal Commission's conditional concurrence, specifically Condition 7C, with Bones consistency determination for the Humboldt and Morro Bay wind energy areas, which was later codified in SB 286. The deliverable of the working group will be a statewide strategy for avoiding, minimizing, and mitigating impacts to fishing and fisheries. And SB 286 further requires any offshore wind applicant to comply with the statewide strategy, which will include a template for fishing community benefit agreements. CFRA's Phase 1 Community Benefit Agreement template, as you see there, and the discussions surrounding it really helped to ensure that the 7C working group members hit the ground running and has continued to be an important venue for discussion. This has also included extensive outreach and engagement with the fishing community on the 7C working group, but also much more broadly than that. Next slide. So with Phase 1 wrapping up, the CFRA is ready to continue the work that they're already doing and expand that work. The objectives for Phase 2 include a development of a CFRA fishing community resiliency policy for the disbursement of mitigation assessment funds to be used to promote long-term resiliency of California's fishing industry and community. Enhanced outreach and communication with commercial, recreational, and tribal fishing communities. This is through, they already have a website they developed as Phase 1, but they have plans to really revamp the website, more materials, more attending events, things like that. And then continued facilitation of commercial, recreational, and tribal fishing sector participation in that Condition 7C working group. Amend as appropriate the fishing community benefit template that was developed in Phase 1 based on the input from the Condition 7C working group and the recommendations that are formed through that. Continued coordination with the offshore wind industry, and then continue to act as a point of contact for the fishing sector community, and specifically during the negotiation and execution of industry-to-industry agreements that are expected to follow the 7C working group and are part of that sort of longer-term process that you heard from with Maya. Next slide. So with that, the recommendation before you is $397,000 to the California Fishermen's Resiliency Association to enhance industry-to-industry cooperation on offshore wind community benefit agreements with a timeline of about 3 years. Thank you.
All right. Good afternoon, council members. My name is Sri Gopal, and today it's my pleasure to bring forward this proposal to you on Humboldt Bay eelgrass distribution mapping and spatial modeling. Next slide, please. So Humboldt Bay is traditionally known as Wigi to the Wiyot tribe, whose ancestral lands really encompass the whole bay and the surrounding watersheds. And it holds approximately 29% of the state's eelgrass, but this data set is really based on an aging survey from 15 years ago. And since 2009, the bay has seen significant changes, both climate change driven, such as droughts and a marine heat wave and floods, as well as anticipated activities in the Humboldt port in preparation for offshore wind development. So given these changes, there's really an urgent need to better understand what the baseline looks like for the eelgrass population in the bay, and also what's really going to happen to this population of eelgrass as all these changes happen in Humboldt. Next slide, please. So across the state of California, Humboldt Bay has really been experiencing the greatest rate of sea level rise, as most of us here are aware. And with this increase in sea level rise, there are also additional things that are happening in the bay, such as observed increase in erosion of eelgrass in the tidal flats and likely increases in the main channels of the bay of reduction in eelgrass population. And there are also additional considerations of expanding the estuary boundary or the tidal prism into the adjacent agricultural lands that are also subsiding. So given these considerations, again, the need for baseline data sets and ability to predict how eelgrass is going to respond with predicted changes of wave conditions is essential. Next slide, please. Additionally, the port of Humboldt Bay is undergoing a significant development, right? There is a proposed change for port expansion, and the Humboldt Bay Harbor Recreation or Conservation District, or the Harbor District, is pursuing building a heavy lift multipurpose marine terminal or terminal to support offshore wind activities. And since 2022, over $445 million have been allocated, and the Humboldt Bay Harbor District is pursuing this for design, permitting, and construction activities. And a portion of this funding would also be routed to environmental restoration activities. So the design of the port is still ongoing, and it's concurrent with the California Environmental Quality Act and the Environmental Impact Review. The CEQA EIR process is concurrent with the design of the port expansion. In this context, the need for survey and model data, specifically high-resolution survey data, is critical to inform siting and mitigation requirements for in the context of regulatory requirements for offshore wind port development. Next slide, please. Therefore, all of this is leading up to our proposed project objectives, where the project goal is to leverage tribal and local partnerships to, one, to update the eelgrass distribution mapping for the Humboldt Bay, bay-wide, not just in smaller tributaries and channels, but the entire bay, including subtidal bathymetry data collection for the bay. The second goal is to collect light and temperature data sets for the bay, because these are going to feed into refining an existing hydrodynamic model, which is an amazing data set that already exists and that can be really built upon to build into the third objective, which is actually developing a spatial modeling for eelgrass, which is the model that could then be used to predict how the population is going to change in response to both the natural changes happening in the bay as well as the anthropogenic changes that the bay is going to undergo. Next slide, please. I do want to emphasize here that this project really relies on strong tribal partnerships that already exist within the bay. And the first partnership that I want to speak to is with the We Are Tribes Natural Resources Division, which will be supporting this project through marine technicians and vessel deployment. And this is specific for task 2, the bay water quality data collection. The We Are Tribe is also planning to establish a data station in the bay, the CENCUS, or the Central and Northern California Observation Station in the bay, to support this effort. The second partnership that I wanted to highlight is the engagement with the North Coast Tribal Corporation, Condor Aviation. This is a company that has expertise in aerial mapping, specifically for estuarine and riverine habitats. So this is a great way to engage with local tribal partnership groups and also add value to this project overall. Next slide, please. So therefore, the recommendation in front of you is authorization of disbursement of up to $500,000 to our potential grantee, Merkel and Associates, who would conduct this bay-wide eelgrass distribution survey and collect ancillary water column data, facilitate the development of an eelgrass habitat suitability model for the bay based on the data sets that are collected. And the timing of this could not be better, because summer is when the survey season begins. And the timeline of this project would be 20 months, starting in July through February of 2026, pending suitable weather conditions like low tide and lack of cloud cover. And there are several other factors in play when it comes to surveys. So with that in mind, I want to wrap up here for today. Next slide, please. Thank you all for the opportunity to present this project. Happy to take any questions.
We'll go to public comment, but first, if any of the awardees would like to come up and speak.
Good afternoon. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I was a little unsure who was supposed to be speaking right now, but I'm up here, so we'll get started. My name is Ken Bates. I'm here with Linda Hildebrand. She's my wife. We're commercial fishermen in California. I've been on the boats since I was 15. Let's see where to start. The two of us are part of the founding team for the California Fishermen's Resiliency Association. I think there was about maybe a dozen fishermen that worked on this to get this going. I'm going to drop back a little bit from where we are, and I'm going to explain the beginning of our relationship with the Ocean Protection Council. Most fishermen know that there's this thing called the Ocean Protection Council, but most fishermen have not had much interactions. And one of the things that happened for us is that in meetings with Bureau of Ocean Energy Management and the various state agencies, fishermen were constantly asked, where do you fish? Just point on the map, show me the spot where you go. And it was far more complicated than that. We put up with that for about 2 years, and eventually one of our young association presidents said, well, we're going to do our own mapping project. It was probably one of the most unpleasant things I could have ever said at a meeting with agency folks. As it turns out, Linda and I wrote an application to Ocean Protection Council, and we were lucky enough to have the help of Lindsay Benita to help us get through the application and basically understand what it was we were doing. And we were able to produce the first mapping project for Northern California. And that's a mapping of fishing grounds, and it's done by gear type and habitat area. And it's from Point Arena to Crescent City. Additionally, we were also asked at some of these meetings, how come fishermen never answer their phones? And so there was no way for the people that we work with at the Coastal Commission, Kate Hucklebridge and Holly and some of the folks there to get a hold of us. And so this was the reason that the California Fishermen's Resiliency Association got started. We're up to, I think it's 13 or 14 associations right now. Again, we came to you guys for funding. That's kind of what we did. And we were lucky. We were lucky again because we were able to get help putting together an application so that we could go ahead and assist the state in finding a way for fishermen's groups to survive these projects. Fishermen are not opposed to renewable energy, but we're really concerned about fishing ground loss. And so one of the things with Justine and with Megan Williams, we have managed to get to the point where we are today, where we've kicked out a couple different documents and those kind of things. Whatever you decide to do today will be perfectly fine. I'm mostly here to thank you for your time. And we actually learned a lot through the process. So thanks again.
Hello, everyone. I'm Amy Wolfram from Monterey Bay Aquarium, and I'm here speaking on item 8A today. We believe that California can and must transition to a renewable energy future in a way that prioritizes the prevention and minimization of impacts from offshore wind energy on the California current ecosystem. There is a lot at stake as the California current ecosystem is one of the most unique and productive bioregions on the planet. The development of offshore wind, particularly the novel floating systems, is a new industrial use of this ecosystem and presents many unknowns. Robust science and monitoring must be given precedence to enable science-based adaptive decision-making and adhere to the principles of precaution and stewardship for ocean resources. Comprehensive environmental research and monitoring ensures the best available science can inform decisions on management and use of the ocean, advance efforts to coordinate diverse interested parties, effectively allocate resources, and support collaborative data sharing. This will enable the state to identify, assess, and address the potential ecosystem impacts to meet its goal of developing offshore wind in a manner that protects coastal and marine ecosystems. For these reasons, we strongly support the establishment of an expert science entity to guide the planning and prioritization of environmental monitoring and research related to offshore wind development in California and throughout the California current ecosystem. We welcome and commend this update expressing OPC's intent to establish a science entity, as well as the proposed funding and staffing in the recent budget change proposal to support the first phase of its development. We also appreciate Assemblymember Addis's leadership in the legislature, along with Senator Laird and Lieutenant Governor Kounalakis in support of a science entity. We look forward to being active participants in this work. Thank you.
Hi, Joss Hill from the Pew Charitable Trusts. Again, I'm speaking on 8C, the consideration and approval of disbursement of funds for the Humboldt Bay eelgrass distribution mapping and spatial modeling. So I submitted written comments, so just to summarize here, that Pew enthusiastically supports full funding for this project. Eelgrass is a really important habitat in the ocean, and Humboldt Bay has more than a third of California's eelgrass meadows. And so collecting this data, having this information is going to be really important for meeting OPC's strategic plan, also for planning for 30 by 30, and finally for achieving the state's nature-based solution climate targets. So thank you so much, and I'll leave it at that.
Hello there, Laura Dehan, State Director with Environment California. And let's see, I wanted to thank Ocean Protection Council staff and the folks who put together the updates. And as Environment California was one of the original bill sponsors of AB 525, and so we're big supporters of California going big on offshore wind. As we saw from the earlier discussion items, climate change is happening all around us, and we also have the solutions all around us, right, in these incredible resources, like the offshore winds that blow off of our coast, that could actually provide all of our energy needs today, and as we need to double the amount of electricity capacity as we, shift to 100% clean transportation and clean buildings and clean industries, we are going to need a whole lot more clean electricity to meet that need. And offshore wind is a great solution for that. Let's see, I think I also wanted to underscore that one of the big lessons from the East Coast and from around the world is that strong stakeholder engagement is really important to make sure that concerns are addressed early on and that community support stays strong. And so for that reason, we are in support of these partnerships and these funding allocations today, the partnership with the Fishery Resilience Organization. And we also think that ongoing research is really crucial on the conservation, on the impacts to biodiversity. As we do this big clean energy development, we have to make sure we're doing it right, and that's going to require that ongoing science monitoring. So we also support the initiative from the Monterey Bay Aquarium and NRDC and Don Addis, the Assembly member, to advance that science entity. We're excited to see that in the proposal, and so we support it all. Thank you.
All right, do we have any public comment online?
Yes, we do. We have 10 public commenters. We have Asha, Amy Vieira, Susan Jordan, Gary Brennan, Chris Voss, Matthew Simon, Richard Sadowski, Mark Smith, Tom Hafer, Irene Gutierrez, and 11. One more and last one for this item will be Adam Cantor. Asha, you have the floor.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, great. So good afternoon. My name is Asia Hudson, a marine conservation analyst and program manager at the Environmental Defense Center, a public interest law firm that defends nature and advances environmental justice on California's Central Coast through advocacy and legal action. We primarily work in San Luis Obispo, Santa Barbara, and Ventura counties. Thank you for providing the chance to give input. It is of the utmost importance to first avoid impacts wherever possible instead of relying on mitigation. We encourage the usage and adherence to the mitigation hierarchy where avoidance of impacts is top priority, followed by minimization of impacts, then restoration, and then lastly, offsetting the impacts elsewhere for offshore wind. In addition, we would like to see a comprehensive impact analysis, which includes the following: an evaluation of the effects of site assessment, construction, operation, and decommissioning of all 5 of the California lease areas, an analysis of the combined impact of wind projects on bird and bat populations, and an evaluation of the possible introduction of invasive species and pathogens through future development activities due to the presence of transmission lines, floating substations, and other infrastructure in state and water coastal areas, and increased vessel traffic. Finally, data collected by the identified entities that will conduct monitoring and impact analyses should be housed transparently, and a notice of availability should be shared with the public immediately. EDC supports offshore wind development and construction. We just want it to be done in a responsible manner based on science. Once again, thank you for giving the chance to provide input, and have a good day. Thank you.
Amy Vieira, the floor is yours.
Good afternoon. My name is Amy Vieira, and I'm a renewable energy specialist with the California State Lands Commission. We'd like to offer our support for agenda items 8B and 8C. With respect to 8B, the CFRA has been an active and engaged group in identifying the impacts of offshore wind on the fishing community. I serve on the California Offshore Wind Fisheries Working Group, also known as the Condition 7C Working Group, with CFRA Executive Director Ken Bates. Mr. Bates is a very effective member of this working group, which is charged with developing a statewide strategy to avoid, minimize, and mitigate impacts to fishing and fisheries. As noted in the staff recommendation, OPC funds have been used by CFRA to enable fishing members of the working group to attend in-person meetings. The working group held its 3rd meeting, and the first one in person just a couple of weeks ago in Sacramento, and a lot of progress was made in that 2-day meeting. Continued funding will allow CFRA and other fishing representatives to continue participating in this important working group, so we support this funding. With respect to agenda item 8C, we support this work to develop an eelgrass habitat suitability model for Humboldt Bay. The Humboldt Bay Harbor Recreation and Conservation District, which operates on legislatively granted public trust lands subject to the Commission's oversight, has a proposed heavy lift marine terminal to support activities related to the developing offshore wind industry. The proposed port upgrades have the potential to impact the bay's remaining eelgrass stands. It's also important to identify areas in the bay where eelgrass can potentially be restored. A 2021 study from Drs. Ph.D. and Ward found that on the US West Coast, site suitability rather than restoration method was the primary driver of success in eelgrass restoration projects. Thank you very much to the council and to the staff, and we look forward to continuing to work with you. Thank you.
Susan Jordan, you have the floor. Susan Jordan, you have the floor.
Okay, got it. Okay. Hi, this is Susan Jordan, the Executive Director of the California Coastal Protection Network, speaking on 8A. First, I want to thank you for your time and attention to floating offshore wind. We all understand how important it is that as California seeks to meet our clean energy goals, it is done in a responsible and just manner that's protective of marine and coastal resources while protecting and uplifting traditionally impacted communities. So I was a little bit surprised this past Friday to see the finalization of the AB 525 strategic plan agendized for the June Energy Commission meeting, given the relatively short time frame between the late April deadline for public comment and the hearing next week. But we are hopeful that the final plan will incorporate the thorough comments and recommendations submitted by our NGO colleagues, including CCPN. For instance, CCPM believes that the final strategic plan must address decommissioning. This essential planning element cannot be deferred to a future time. As we have learned from our experience with the offshore oil industry, we need strong detailed plans that require sufficient bonds and a clear delineation of responsibility and authority in place before development is approved, not after. Furthermore, we all know there will be impacts from this nascent industry, and the only way to account for and avoid and mitigate those impacts is to require that scientific study and baseline monitoring begin now. We're keeping a very close eye on permit streamlining. We're hearing that word far too frequently recently. We do appreciate the funding that has been put into the budget change proposal, but we also hope that the positions that have been identified will be funded permanently and not temporarily. So thank you very much for your attention.
Gary Brennan, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, Gary Brennan with the San Diego County Wildlife Federation. And before I started, thank you for letting me speak. I am a supporter of our offshore wind farms. However, we're getting into unknown territory with deep water offshore wind. My questions that need to really be answered are, what are the wind restrictions for offshore deep water wind farms? I know regular wind farms, you have to turn them off when the wind gets too high. What sea state is going to be restricted to those wind farms? And with the turbines, and once you get a turbine going up and down and right and left and rocking and rolling, once those bearings go out, and what is the lube oil spill prevention mitigation that's going to be involved? Also, anchoring anything in deep water, like 2,600 feet, like they're proposing, with the triple anchor setup that they are proposing, it creates its own issues with how they're going to anchor it and with what materials. The port facility infrastructures, deep water ports need to be built. Not only that, but there are no ships to tow these, tow them, install them, and maintain these current turbine farms. The tethering of the turbines is also an issue. We don't know how it's going to work when we do it and put it all together, because we're pretty much the deepest offshore wind farm in the world once we get things going. And so what are the impacts to the seabirds and the whales due to turbine blade strikes and the vibration and noise? So there's a lot of issues, and I think before we go all in on this project, we ought to set a small sample project in both the locations before we waste tons and tons of money on stuff that may not be sustainable. So thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Chris Voss, you have the floor.
Good afternoon, councilors. My name is Chris Voss, and I'm the president of the Commercial Fishermen of Santa Barbara. And I want to just briefly make a strong statement of support for the OPC to continue to fund the CFRA's activities. I think that that organization is doing a phenomenal job in helping commercial fishermen represent themselves well in the face of offshore wind impacts. So thank you very much.
Matthew Simmons, you have the floor.
Hello, good afternoon. My name is Matthew Simmons. I'm an attorney with the Environmental Protection Information Center, or EPIC. EPIC is based in Humboldt County. I'm actually calling in from Humboldt Bay. We've been defending the North Coast of California since 1977. EPIC supports the responsible development of offshore wind, including the development of Humboldt Bay for a heavy lift marine terminal to facilitate offshore wind. The climate crisis is the single most dangerous threat to the ecosystems which EPIC exists to protect. And EPIC believes if it is implemented responsibly, offshore wind will play a crucial role in decarbonizing our electric sector and fighting climate change. That's why we're monitoring this development closely in order to ensure that it is done responsibly, both for the ecosystems and the communities that will be impacted. I want to express my support for the work being done by the Ocean Protection Council to develop monitoring guidance to evaluate the effects of floating offshore wind, and also to take steps in establishing an expert science entity to further coordinate environmental monitoring and research. These actions are necessary to ensure that offshore wind is implemented in a responsible manner so that independent scientists and the public can get on board with it. One essential element of implementing offshore wind responsibly is to ensure that there are structures in place to coordinate and oversee the development of the science, as well as to develop sound monitoring and management measures. In particular, we really want to see gathering of baseline information, ensuring that monitoring data is shared promptly with the public, and to create the expert science entity that I mentioned earlier. In particular on 8C, we're super excited to see this grant funding for this research of eelgrass in Humboldt Bay. People are talking about offshore wind as a threat to the eelgrass, but climate change is also a very significant threat. And so it's really important that we get this information and have an understanding of the baseline conditions so that we can defend our bay from all the impacts that we're expecting in the future. So thank you very much for all the work that you do.
Richard Sadowski, the floor is yours.
Richard Sadowski, Homefront DJ. I am in support of the OPC's AA agenda item, and also I just like to speak on. There's a lot of information that is being disseminated that is not quite accurate, and I would. In fact, I've reached out to Tom and Mark Cognazzini over here in Morro Bay and trying to get a meeting together where we could have some meaningful dialogue, because the fishermen years ago in 2012, the fishermen and a lot of the groups got together and we did stop the high energy cannon testing that they were proposing, HES high energy seismic survey here off of Estero Bay. So it is possible to get and start collaborating. And one of the things that I would be interested in is discussing with the local fishermen. They had an agreement with a previous leaseholder on the offshore wind, and I would like to maybe revisit that agreement and be able to see what was in there and maybe come to a solution where the local fishing community can be laced into the community benefit program that the leaseholders have, so we can address some of the critical issues that we have in Morro Bay, and that's sea level rise, funding for the protection of our basically economic engine, which is the Embarcadero along the harbor there. And, we have already given that infrastructure, water and sewer infrastructure that needs to be addressed, and also, how we're going to protect those businesses. And the biggest threat really is the amount of carbon dioxide that's going into the air. It's going exponential. So, I just continue the good work and, the dialogue, keep the dialogue open. Thank you for your time.
Tom Hafer, the floor is now yours.
Okay, so I really appreciate Ken and Linda doing all the work up there in Humboldt. And I appreciate the OPC funding that. That's good. Monitoring. So the Island Pride, which is a survey boat for Equinor, Atlas Wind, has been pounding the bottom since April 19th. They've set, 20 UTP buoys. Those are the buoys that the subs coordinate with as they're flying along the bottom, surveying the bottom, counting the bottom, whatever you want to call it. No research has been done. No monitoring's been done. So my suggestion is trawlers for the last 20 years have been running those transects through the call areas. They do it every year, every other year. It's expensive. You need, the first monitoring thing you need to do, as soon as the Island Pride gets done monitoring Equinor's call area, don't let any other boats go out there and do any more pounding. As soon as those guys get done, you need to send them down to the call area that Equinor's pounding right now. They run the same transects they have for years and years and go through there and see how bad they screwed it up. Because they've been out there since April 19th, pounding the bottom. They've been running all their cable lanes. So, and nothing's been done. No monitoring, no nothing. So maybe you should start there. It's going to cost the OPC. I think it should cost the wind farms the money because they're the ones that are bullying us around everywhere. You know, I mean, they'll just come in and do whatever they want, get the keys to the city. Nobody cares. But fishing's already down 67%. So there's an impact. I don't know if you guys are aware of that, but that's what's happening. Thank you.
Irene Gutierrez, the floor is yours. Irene, you're muted.
Great. How about now?
Perfect.
Great, thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Irene Gutierrez. I'm a senior attorney with the Natural Resources Defense Council. I'm here to express my support for the Ocean Protection Council's excellent work on offshore wind, including its work to develop offshore wind monitoring guidance and to lay the foundation for an expert science entity. NRDC supports responsibly developed offshore wind. It's a critical tool in fighting the climate crisis and holds a lot of potential to grow the green economy. And it must also be developed in a way that protects California's vibrant coastal and marine ecosystems and the communities that depend on them. A key element of developing wind responsibly, since it is a very new technology for the United States and its full effects are still unknown, is making sure that there are good systems to fill data gaps, continue developing the science, and develop protective monitoring and management measures. OPC's work will help provide that structure. And so we at NRDC support the agency's efforts, support making sure that the agency is adequately funded and staffed to continue this work. And we also look forward to continued collaboration with OPC and its sister agencies as the offshore wind industry moves forward. Thank you.
Our last comment on this item will be Adam Cantor. Adam, the floor is yours.
Well, greetings, everybody. Exciting meeting to be at today. I am commenting on item 8C. I'm Natural Resources Director for the Wiyot Tribe up here on the Wiggy, or Humboldt Bay. As many here hopefully know, the Wiyot are the original caretakers of the Wiggy and the Bay, our tribal peoples, our water protectors and water keepers. And this disbursement of funds to rekindle the Wiggy eelgrass distribution and mapping effort, we're in support of, along with this opportunity to help the tribe reclaim its stewardship role and caretaking role up here on the Wiggy through continuing to monitor water quality on the bay and help to protect the immensely culturally important resource of eelgrass, which serves as both a nursery for culturally important species like Dungeness crab, but also critically important for waterfowl like black brant and many other species in the bay, and really see this as an opportunity to both monitor potential impacts from proposed development, but also build capacity within the tribe through the education of tribal technicians and broadening our effort to steward the wonderful eelgrass meadows that we have up here on the Wiggy. So thank you for your consideration in funding this important effort. Have a great day.
Thank you all. That was the last of our virtual comments.
Thank you. Council members, comments, discussion? Hearing none, I'll-
I actually have a question. Is there some sense of why there is an erosion of the eelgrass in Humboldt Bay? Do we understand why that's happening? I apologize if that's not a fair question.
I don't think I have a definitive answer to that. But hopefully some of the monitoring and some of the data sets that we might be collecting in the bay will point to why that might be happening, especially the temperature and light data could point us to why that might be happening. If there's been a shift or if there's reduced conditions favorable for growth, that could be another reason.
Is it, so it's sensitive to turbidity?
Sorry?
It's sensitive to turbidity?
Yes.
Thank you.
And temperature.
They said it was up to me, so yeah, please.
Yeah, thanks again, Ken Bates. So I have fished and lived in Humboldt Bay since 1970. Your question is a good question. There's a couple things that have happened since I've been there. One of the things that was about 20 or 25 years ago, the Harbor District decided to go ahead and increase the federal depth of the dredge channels for the ships. And when they did that, we saw basically loss of eelgrass habitat clear up into Mad River Slough and places like that. And what it was from is from the increase in the speed of the tide. So we saw areas that were undercut and the banks would basically just slough off and the rhizomes would be exposed. You know, and so we saw that happening. We expect that if the Harbor District goes ahead and does 13 million cubic yards of dredging for the heavy lift terminal, we're going to see the same thing on Tuluwat Island and those places. This project that you guys are anticipating is super important. Thank you.
Of course.
Just really briefly, I wanted to thank you so much for providing those comments. And it just really highlights the importance of involving the local community, the people who actually know what's going on and have this long history of experience in the area. I just really highlights how important that is. So thank you. And excited about all of these projects. I'm happy to make a motion. Do we have to do 2 motions?
I think they combine 8B and 8C.
I move that OPC approve the disbursement of up to $397,000 to the California Fishermen's Resiliency Association to enhance industry-to-industry cooperation on offshore wind fishing community benefit agreements. And also move that OPC approve the disbursement of up to $500,000 to Merkel and Associates to conduct a bay-wide eelgrass distribution study in Humboldt Bay, collect water column data to facilitate development of an eelgrass habitat suitability model for Humboldt Bay, providing important data to inform offshore wind port development.
Second. Right. Can you please call the roll for the vote?
Stephanie Shimazu,
Aye.
Katie Landau,
Aye.
Christina Kunkel.
Yes.
The council has voted unanimously. The motion passes.
Oh. Yes. All right, yes. Item 9, public comment on non-agenda items. So if there are members of the public who'd like to speak, please come up to the podium.
Still afternoon.
Keith Rootsart, founder of the Giant Kelp Restoration Project in Monterey. OPC and Fish and Wildlife Kelp Restoration Management Plan Working Group, they first convened in 2022 and may deliver a permitting framework in 2026. At Monterey Bay National Marine Sanctuary Advisory Council, I was the chair of 3 iconic kelp working groups of education, conservation and policy, and research. We all met in April, and we provided recommendations to Superintendent Lisa Wunink May 17th. The recommendations from the constituents are in your meeting materials and include the need for clarity about calling urchins in marine protected areas. The recommendations affirmed by OPC and CDFW representatives is to pursue moving forward beyond the pilot phase. We have been doing pilot projects in Monterey for the last 6 years. Our proposed efforts to restore giant kelp forests will use the best available science and informed research. But science cannot lead our endeavor, or we will repeat what happened at Tankers Reef, where government authorities, for the sake of science, deliberately killed a thriving kelp forest that the volunteers made, with sea otters living on it in an El Nino year, in an election year. Urchins eat kelp, believe me. What could heal our pain would be your support for our FGC petition 2023-23 MPA to allow kelp restoration in our best places, the MPAs, by volunteer divers to provide ecosystem services to keep help and hope alive. Thank you.
Do we have anyone online for public comment?
We do. We have Richard Sadowski and caller ending in 5936. Richard, you have the floor.
Richard Sadowski, Homefront EJ. I just wanted to thank the College Corps program of California, how we have 4 interns working on our project here in Morro Bay called the Morro Bay Estuary Air Monitoring Project. And with the help of the San Luis Obispo Community Foundation, who issued us a grant, we have installed the first air monitor on the Morro Bay Estuary, measuring atmospheric carbon dioxide, and collaborating with the Cal Poly Carbon Lab, directed by Dr. Bachman, in studying ocean acidification. And I just always am encouraged by the young people, and continue. I hope to, have the OPC maybe open up some small grant programs so organizations like ours can continue to collaborate with the university and the community in working toward addressing the climate change and climate action that we are so desperately needing, and establishing some baseline data in our community, but more importantly, working and getting the community involved with it. So I want to thank everybody at OPC and all the staff and all the hard work that you guys do. And it's always an education to listen to your meetings. Thank you.
Caller ending in 5936, you have the floor.
Eileen Bogan, Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods, speaking on my own behalf. San Francisco's Ocean Beach Master Plan was released in 2012. The lead for this plan was a pro-developer think tank called SPUR, with few environmental credentials and with direct links to the Bike Coalition. The environmental scientists whose input became part of the Ocean Beach Master Plan were ones with a focus on wave action to the exclusion of areas such as currents and sediment transport. The resulting recommendations focused on sand relocation and sand nourishment, along with managed retreat. Even though San Francisco is the second most densely populated city in the U.S., only behind New York City, Managed retreat was a recommendation. Managed retreat is even more questionable as the entire length of the upper grade highway is part of the Department of Public Works Emergency Priority Routes Map, which could be used for emergency evacuation. Since most of San Francisco was destroyed in the 1906 earthquake and part of the city was destroyed in the 1989 earthquake, public safety is a priority along with economic vitality. The proposed permanent closure of the upper grade highway between Skyline and Sloat under the premise of managed retreat is contradictory to public safety and economic vitality, as it would reconfigure this section so it would be unusable for emergency evacuation. It would basically turn into bike infrastructure and set up Ocean Beach to become Miami Beach. This 12-year-old plan needs to be reevaluated. Thank you.
There are no more comments.
I think we've gotten to the last item on the agenda. And that's for information for the next meeting. That's going to be held on Tuesday, September 10th, 2024 from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock within the CNRA Auditorium. Zoom participation will also be available. And the final meeting for 2024 is scheduled for Tuesday, December 9th. So that concludes today's meeting and we are adjourned. Thanks everyone for being here.